We all set, Tom? All right, good evening. Welcome to the July 25th Village Board Work Session. This meeting is called to order. We'll begin with the pledge.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Alrighty. Well, we have a very exciting and full agenda of legally related items, and the first is a potential something that's going through the planning boards. And so, Debbie, do you want to update us, or Stuart, do you want to update us?
Are we doing announcements?
Oh yeah. I'm sorry. Thank you. We just said that. I'm so excited to get to our Hidden Cove discussion. Please, yes. What do you have on your calendar, John?
Only one thing. Only one thing. Tomorrow night at the Elks Lodge, we're doing the Thursday night organ groove, and it should be a lot of fun. Because of the weather, we're not going to be able to play outdoors, which is kind of disappointing. But saxophonist John Tendy is joining John Doty and Paul Connors, and we'll be playing in the listening room in the back of the Elks Lodge. So that's at 7 o'clock, 118 Croton Avenue, if you're looking for some great live music tomorrow night. See you there. Thank you.
You're good?
Believe it or not, I'm good.
And I'll just remind folks that next Friday, August 3rd, is the Firefighters Parade, and Step Off is, I guess it's 7 based on the time we're supposed to be there. Okay, and it goes right down Main Street and then all the way down to the waterfront. So please do come out and enjoy It's always a good community event. I'm sorry, I can't read your lips. Oh, Cops! I don't have the details. Please share us. What's going on with Cops and Kids tomorrow night? She's so glad she remembered to mention it.
Found me out again.
Well, I could find it on Facebook, I suppose.
That's where I'm going.
Yeah. It's a movie night tomorrow night at Nelson Park. It impacts my son's baseball game. That's why I know. It's movie night tomorrow night. Do you know what movie it is?
No, I don't.
All right.
It is Vets Park, the one at Narragansett, is Cops with Kids for soccer. They're playing 6 to 8, weather permitting.
It is? Cops and Kids soccer, Vets, 6 to 8?
Yeah.
Tomorrow, Thursday? Excellent. All right, well, I was all wrong with my information. Good, I'm glad you were here, Jamie. All right, so now we will ask Stuart to introduce the next topic.
Thank you, Mayor. First tonight is a presentation on the Hidden Cove project, which is down near off the river that some of you may be familiar with. We have Brad Schwartz and Paul Berthet who are here. Brad Schwartz is with the firm of Zarin and Steinmetz. Paul Berthet is involved with the engineering with regard to the project. I also have Jim Stout here, who is special counsel to the planning board with regard to this, and Steve Rabel, his associate. And Jim, if you want to come up to the desk with us, that'd be great. The floor is yours.
I am sure.
So you want to move your mouse.
Perfect. So thank you, Mr. Kahan, for that introduction, and good evening, Mayor and members of the board. Again, Brad Schwartz from the law firm of Zarin and Steinmetz. We represent the applicant on this project, Plateau Associates, and as Mr. Kahan mentioned, I'm joined this evening by Paul Berthet of Petrocelli Engineering. So we have a PowerPoint presentation to walk your board through this evening. This first slide is just our cover page, and it shows the most recent rendering of the building. The architecture, as you can see, involves masonry, glass, and stucco. It was designed with a light industrial feel to reflect the prior industrial history of the lower Hudson Valley area, and it was designed in such a way so it's not a monolithic facade. The purpose of tonight's meeting is to introduce the planned waterfront special permit. We made an application to your board, I believe it was July 16th. We submitted the form and all the necessary materials. And the purpose of the special permit is that by your board considering and at our request granting the special permit, that would allow the planning board to approve an increased density for the project in exchange for the provision of public amenities. And we'll get into that later on during the presentation. So the purpose again is to introduce the special permit application and to provide an overview of the project, including of particular importance to the village board is a proposed license or easement on what's known as the village's lot 6 or 7 North Water Street. Going the wrong way. So the project, as some of you may know, is would constitute 137 rentals, 10% affordable, meaning 14 affordable units. It's a mix of 1 bedroom and 2 bedrooms. The split is 34 ones, 103 twos. It's a 6-story building that would comply with all zoning and all height requirements. The project would be designed to be LEED Gold certifiable. I'll point out in our submission materials, we mentioned it would be LEED Silver certification. That conversation is continuing to evolve and it's ongoing with the planning board. And just last night, the applicant made a commitment to achieve LEED Gold certifiable as the standard. So I wanted to clarify that. Again, your submission materials mentioned LEED Silver. There would be 193 parking spaces, 147 in a garage, 46 on the surface. The building is situated on the previously developed flat area of the site. It was purposefully situated in that area in order to minimize disturbance and maintain as much of the natural resources as possible. The project also involves off-site road improvements to North Water Street and what's known as the North Water Street extension. The procedural status, this project has been ongoing for many, many years. The last 5 or 6 months have been particularly active before the planning board. We've been at, I think, every meeting since February. As you can see on the screen, there's been public hearings the last couple of months on the draft final supplemental environmental impact statement. That's the FSEIS that's indicated on the slide. There have been 3 public hearings, the most recent being last night. The site plan public hearing is also ongoing, has been running coterminous with the FSEIS hearing. And again, there was a public hearing last night on both the FSEIS and the site plan. The site plans, the FSEIS, and the SWIP, I mentioned the SWIP because that's a major component of the project, which would be the stormwater management plan. These have all been reviewed extensively by Kellert Sessions, the planning board's engineering consultant. We've gotten several technical comment memoranda. The plans have been revised. The FSEIS has been revised over time. So we think we have pretty good documents that are now pending before the planning board, and we're hoping that we're nearing the end of the planning board's review. And I should mention the same documents have obviously been reviewed also by the board special counsel, Mr. Stout, who's here tonight. Here is just a quick overview of the proposed building. You see it mentions this see if the mouse works. So here's 6-story building. Off the screen here is North Water Street would be coming in, and then this roadway pulls in. Here's parking outside, and then this entrance here pulls into the garage. We met with the fire department, I should mention, just the other day, and so the fire department has essentially signed off on the layout here for fire access and emergency access. There were a couple of tweaks, including increasing this hammerhead right here a couple of feet, but by and large the fire department has given its blessing on the design from a fire safety purpose. These are planted retaining walls on the east side. Here's a roof garden, and there's an indoor swimming pool and a spa that would provide amenities for the residents. So this is again just an overview of the project. I believe we submitted with our packet an overview site plan, an overall site plan of the project that gives some more details. Here are some architectural elevations prepared by the architects from Warshauer Architects. This is the top one is the north elevation. So this would be looking from the north looking south. The bottom elevation is the west elevation. So this is looking from the river. So look west looking east. Here's again the principal building. And this is the roof garden and the pool. And here we have the south and the east elevations. As you can see, the architecture wraps around the entire building. It's the same materials and the same design. This slide shows some visual renderings that were prepared as part of the planning board seeker process. It shows that the building's massing and orientation, which as you can see is perpendicular to the river. We submit that these visuals show that the building as situated would not cause any adverse visual impacts, would preserve view corridors. You can see the dominant view, especially from the river, remains this wooded hillside as it rises up in elevation to the east. And again, that's the view from the river. And looking from the east here, the views are really looking over the top of the proposed building and into the dense existing vegetation. I mentioned, so we just talked about the on-site proposal, the on-site improvements. I mentioned that there would be off-site road improvements to North Water Street, and again, the North Water Street extension. The terminology, North Water Street, refers to the public portion across the village's Lot 6. The North Water Street extension is the portion of the road that crosses onto private property, so just to differentiate that terminology. The road, as I'm sure you all know probably better than I do, is currently in a state of disrepair. There's broken pavement, there's not curbing and sidewalks and stormwater, so the proposal would be to improve North Water Street and the extension from Snowden Avenue all the way to the project site. 24 feet of pavement, 4-foot sidewalk, curbing, drainage, and lighting, really bringing the road up to modern standards and creating a safe, code-compliant road that complies with all fire department and public safety requirements. Again, the fire department just the other day has signed off on the project, on the design of the roadway. And the road, and especially the sidewalk, would facilitate safe pedestrian access to the Krubbake Preserve, other nearby properties, and would also facilitate the planned river walk that I know is in the village's comprehensive plan. The next couple of slides will show the proposed road layout. So we're going to start from the south, working our way up to the project site. So this is the village's, what's known as Lot 6, again, 7 Water Street. The gray is the existing pavement. On this slide, this dashed black line and this dashed black line, it would be the proposed 30-foot right-of-way. So that the 30-foot right-of-way would be the entire width of the road. Again, within that 30 feet would be the 24 feet of pavement, the sidewalk, and the curbing. This slide demonstrates the proposed easement or license that we're seeking from the village in this hatched, where's the mouse? In this hatched area in here. That's about an 882 square foot area that is outside of the existing public easements that exist on the village's lot. Within that easement area would be a portion of the pavement, sidewalk, and curbing. The reason why the road cannot be pulled further to the east, and Paul could explain this further if necessary, is that the village's pump station is located within the village, within the public easement. So the road is designed in such a way to avoid that pump station, and it's again designed as a 30-foot right-of-way. So in order for the road as proposed to be constructed, we need to go outside of the existing public easement for, again, this 882 square foot area. So whether it's an easement, whether it's a license, we could work out that, that paperwork with Mr. Kahan and Mr. Stout. That's one of the requests that we have of the Board of Trustees. That's within your jurisdiction. That's something that the Planning Board cannot approve. As we work our way north, and this is, I guess, the start of the North Water Street extension, because now we're crossing over. Here's the property line. So again, this portion is public, and now we're entering onto the private portion, the North Water Street extension. This is the property that's currently owned by Conga. Sure.
This is what you're asking for, is the shaded part? You said this is the property line, what's that?
That's just, there are a couple of easements. So this is one of the easements that are currently burdened the property.
But who owns this?
Village,
Oh, so this is ours?
yes.
But you're not asking for it?
That easement already exists,
As an easement?
yes. So there are, Mayor, there are existing easements recorded against the property that allow for public access and the right to improve. What we're asking for is permission beyond what currently exists. And again, it's an 882 square foot portion. The road has been designed this way, again, to provide the 30 feet, what we think is a code compliant and safe, safe access to the property, as well as all the other adjoining properties along North Water Street. And what would be within this area, again, is pavement, the sidewalk along the west side of the road, and curbing. So this right here is the property line. As we enter the Conga or Santucci property, Again, the gray is the existing pavement, the red is the proposed right of way. So there's just some minor realignment of the existing pavement within the Conga property. This is known as the Center Road alternative. There is also what's called the West Road alternative. We're currently in conversations with Conga to move the road. It'd be the same road design, the same width and everything, just move 25 feet to the west along their western property line. That would avoid, the road sort of going through the center of their property like this. We would move it over 25 feet. So if we reach an agreement with Conga with respect to that relocation, the road across this portion of the property would just simply be relocated 25 feet to the west. And as we continue on north, the road over the Castle Plumbing property, again, the red is shown as the proposed configuration. It would be realigned and bent in this fashion to facilitate access into the project site. The project also proposes a 1.2 acre conservation easement area to the east of the proposed building. The area here shown in green is the 1.2 acre conservation easement. It would be located adjacent to the Krawbucky Preserve. The applicant, in response to comments by the planning board and its consultants, has agreed to a condition of approval that the applicant would commit to work with the village and the Parks Department to connect the either existing trails or a new trail within the Krawbucky Preserve to this conservation easement to allow for greater open space and connectivity between the two properties. The conservation easement area would still be owned by the applicant, but it would be burdened by a conservation easement. A typical document would be recorded in the village, I'm sorry, not in the village, in the Westchester County Clerk's Office that would in perpetuity preserve this 1.2 acres as open space. It would be maintained by the applicant, owned by the applicant, but again, encumbered with a conservation easement in perpetuity.
Is that space? I'm picturing a steep slope. Is there something there that I'm not accurately envisioning?
So it is steep on the east side, but what we've shown is the topo, and even right here is a potential trail based on the topo that we think in concept works. I'm sorry, Mayor, I'm sorry, I put it wrong. This is the existing stream. Sorry. This dashed line here is the proposed trail that we think is a potential connection source to Krawbucky. And whether we connected the trails that are within the preserve or perhaps a new trail along the southerly boundary here, we will work with the village and the Parks Department to sort of figure that out. What Paul has shown on this plan, he's taken the county topo just to show that there are flat areas that we think would provide an opportunity to create, again, either new trail or connection. So we absolutely commit to working with the village to figuring that all out and making it happen. And that's something that we propose to the planning board as a public amenity for which we are not seeking, for which the applicant is not seeking a density bonus. Another part of the project is what's called the Brandreth Pill Factory Open Air Pavilion. It's meant as a destination for the public down by the waterfront. It's a tribute to the former pill factory. It's been designed in such a way to try to capture some of the architectural elements of the pill factory. It's been relocated to the west side of the road at the request of the planning board and its consultant so that it could be easily accessible from the sidewalk on the west side of the roadway. The applicant is committed to adaptively reusing any bricks that can be salvaged from the office building, not for structural purposes, but to have on display within the building. There would also be educational signage. We would consult with the village historian and the other folks within the village to determine what's the best signage and other ways to, again, commemorate the former pill factory. This slide just again shows some of the renderings, some elevations of the pavilion. Up here, this square shows the location of the pavilion. So again, you see it's on the west side of the roadway, just off the sidewalk, so it's easily accessible by the public. Down in this corner are sample display panels for signage both within and outside the pavilion. Obviously, all those details would be worked out. These are just meant to be sort of samples to give an idea of what could be inside and outside the pavilion. So I started by mentioning that the special permit would allow the planning board to grant a density bonus for the project. So just to show you some of the math, the baseline density in the PWA Northern Waterfront Subdistrict is 22 units per acre. The applicant is seeking two density bonuses, one for providing 10% affordable housing, and the second for providing green building techniques. That again, the green building is the gold certifiable, LEED Gold certifiable that I mentioned earlier. So with a 10% density bonus for providing the affordable housing and a 10% for achieving the LEED Gold certifiable, brings us to a unit count of 26.6 units per acre on a 5.14 acre site, yields 137 units. Again, 10% or 14 of which would be affordable. So we believe that the project satisfies the special permit purposes and requirements in the zoning law. One is that the project promotes the objectives of the PWA waterfront zoning. Some of those objectives are to revitalize this area of the waterfront. It's going to revitalize this currently vacant site, former industrial use as a vibrant, active residential property. We're going to provide a number of amenities. We mentioned the conservation easement, the pavilion, the improved North Water Street, including the sidewalk. Protect water quality. I mentioned the SWIP and the stormwater plan. There is no current stormwater by the road, and so the SWIP, again, the stormwater facilities, would improve the quality of the water being discharged to the Hudson River. And we would also preserve views, again, by its perpendicular orientation to the river and its location on the previously disturbed area of the site. Another requirement is to provide at least one public amenity. We've done that. In fact, we've exceeded that requirement. We're providing the green building techniques. Again, that amenity, we're specifically seeking the density bonus for. Some of these other amenities that we've discussed, the conservation easement, the road improvements, the open air pavilion, the stormwater, are not, again, tied to a density bonus. There are other amenities that we believe are benefits of the project, but we're not seeking density bonuses for any of these other items. Again, just for the green building techniques and the provision of affordable housing, which is required to 10%, which is the project is complying with. So I just want to jump down. In terms of next steps for the special permit application, I defer to Mr. Kahan and Mr. Status to whether your board needs to conduct a formal referral to the planning board. I believe that was done in Hudson Step, but reading the code, I don't know if a formal resolution or referral is necessary. So again, I defer to council. The planning board certainly knows that it needs to provide a report and recommendation back to your board. At this point, your board doesn't need to do anything. You have the application. The planning board is finishing the site plan and the seeker process. Your board, after the planning board completes SECRA, that's when the planning board would issue its report back to the village board. Once SECRA is completed and the planning board issues its report and recommendations back to the village board, that's when your board would conduct a public hearing and consider the special permit. Right? Your board cannot vote on the special permit until after the planning board completes the SECRA process. So we're here tonight to start the process. We wanted to introduce it, begin these discussions, but there's no action required for your board this evening or any time until after the planning board completes SECRA. And then after the SECRA process, and it comes back to the village board and hopefully you approve the special permit, and then we go back to the planning board to finalize and complete the site plan process. In terms of the easement or license over Lot 6, that would most likely be incorporated as a condition of approval in the planning board site plan, but I would like to hear if the board is ready this evening, any feedback or comments on the proposed easement or license on that area, or we could continue the discussion another night. I realize we're introducing it for the first time tonight, so we're happy to answer any questions or address any comments on that topic. The last topic, do you want to?
Please go right ahead, and I'm sure we'll have some questions.
Okay. The last topic, just to mention, the existing office building on the property. There's been much discussion about that at the planning board. We have met with the HPC. In response to the planning board's comments, the applicant has hired and retained Denardis Engineering, a reputable engineering firm in White Plains that has analyzed the office building. It conducted a report in 2012, updated in June of 2018. And Denardis has concluded that the office building is structurally deteriorated, dangerous, unsafe. It's not possible to relocate or restore it. So as part of our proposal, again, the building would be removed. It's in the footprint of the current proposed residential building. And again, as a tribute to the pill factory, the applicant is proposing the open air pavilion that I mentioned earlier. We have discussed with the planning board and the HPC that the applicant would be willing to donate the office building to the village or any of its other agencies. And we would just work out the timing so that if the village chose to take title to the office building and relocate it, we just work out the timing so there's no delay in the construction of the project. And that would be a condition of approval. Again, it's in our secret documents. The applicant has proposed that as a condition, that it would be willing to donate the office building to the village for $1. We've had those discussions with the HPC. I know Mr. Kahan was at that meeting with the HPC. I believe the HPC is taking it under consideration and is evaluating some options. So again, I just wanted to raise that with the village board tonight. I think it was appropriate to bring the village board into those discussions. And that concludes our presentation.
Sure, there's some questions. Leave it where this static thing is fine because. So who wants to get us started? I'm looking at you, John, because you usually do. You've been looking at this property for a long time.
Yes, some things never go away.
Well, the building did.
Yeah, so, thank you for your time. Thank you for your presentation. Obviously, you're going through all the processes. It's a complex series of events that have to take place to make this all happen. As you say, there's still more things to do. I need to probably digest a lot more of this before I make any comment one way or the other. I'll let the planning board do what they need to do. You know, the unfortunate demise of the pill factory was troubling to me, and that there's a little bit of bitterness that resides in me, and I'm sure the HPC wasn't happy about it either. So I am concerned about the condition, or I'd like to get another analysis of the building. And I guess my other question would be, really has to do more with environmental. You know, when the pill factory was taken down, there were some concerns about environmental challenges, asbestos, other things of that nature. I'd like to know if you've done any boring tests, things of that nature, to make sure that you know, whatever's done there, the remediation of the property is done properly, and that it doesn't pose any risk to the Hudson River or any environmental issue that might be, you know, be a danger to wildlife or anything in that area. So I thank you for your time, and I look forward to discussing this with my fellow board members.
Thank you.
Who's next? Any other questions, comments? Oh.
No, it's okay. She thinks there's a mic, but it's over there. I can't tell if it's on or not, is it? So, I mean, you left off that you were in front of the EAC as well, and
In the procedure, yes. We also met with the EAC, and we're expecting their comments, I think, Mr. Khan, within a week or so, or I guess you tell us when.
They're having a work session on Tuesday night.
I just wanted my colleagues to know that that's happening. They had lots of questions and comments. I think overall, it's interesting that you pointed how steep that area is, because when people hear 1 point whatever, if it's on a cliff, it's a very different 1.26 than on flat. And there were a number of questions. The pill factory actually did come up, John, and how that occurred. And that pavilion, is that what you guys call that?
Yes.
Okay. There was a lot of discussion, just in case you don't want to watch the 3 hours of video, there was a lot of discussion, both planning and I think EAC, about the pavilion. That pavilion, to some people, doesn't look like, I would say that most people are underwhelmed with that pavilion as being something historic or something, and that who's paying for it. You know, just putting up a pavilion without anything in it, because a lot of the words talk about working with the village. I think there was a request for more detail, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, sir, because you've been at those meetings. I don't often go to planning board meetings. I was there for a separate reason, but I stayed for the whole evening. So I didn't think about the pavilion until others had raised the question of really what purpose does it serve? What does it look like? What does it mean to anybody? And what what the applicant will actually do besides putting up an open pavilion that, if the rendering is correct, is the size of about 4 people. So that's something that came up. And there was a lack of understanding, and even when I look at it again, for I don't know how many times I've looked at this, you know, the issue of explaining to the public what's, the way easements work, especially in a complex project like this, and what's private property and what's village property and how that plays into it. Not necessarily your job to explain it, but I do want to say to my colleagues that that was, I think some of you know that better than I, but I found that hard to follow, about who owns what and what they've agreed to and what they haven't and what the process is. And I would just suggest that when we have discussions in public, that explanations to that would be helpful to people, because I think when it's presented, it's like, you know, it's fine. Fire department looked at it, no problem. We got to move things 2 feet here, 2 feet there. You know, when you move streets 2 feet here and there, it's not, or entrances, it's sort of a deal. So I'm just going to suggest that when we do this in public, that some of you just know more about it than I do, frankly. But I do want to say that there was lots of discussion also about the number of units. The Board of Education was very much opposed for many reasons, including the algorithm that you all use to say that it won't really add too many kids to the school. They disagree with that wholeheartedly. That's something I think needs to be sort of just digested. You know, and I know John knows this stuff because he's been at this a long time, as he said. But I, you know, that whole algorithm and how it's used is up for discussion, at least in Ossining, and I really only care about Ossining because that's where I'm elected. So I think that those kind of things did come up. And the green roofs also, I think, came up. And because you didn't put, they're meeting again, I know, but that's something that hasn't been done. The AC hasn't had a lot to say in the past. I know you brought this over the many years, but the AC actually this time had lots of commentary on it, which should probably somehow be brought into the conversation on their behalf.
That's why the recommendations will be coming up within the
Right.
next couple of
So I'm really looking forward to that. So, and I thank you. I mean, I think you've really gone through a lot of the process, but some more to go.
Appreciate your comments. I would like to address some of these, but I'm happy to, if each trustee wants to finish their comments, I defer to you, I guess, on the procedure.
It's good. We can be fluid. If there's something you want to jump in on that Rika or John mentioned, please.
So I guess quickly then, Mr. Kami, so there was an environmental phase 1, phase 2 on the property. I believe that was provided as part of the SFEIS. We could always submit a copy, but obviously all environmental protections will be taken to assure no adverse impacts to the environment. That's part of the secret process, and all that's documented as part, as part of the secret review. In terms of the pavilion and who pays for it and what's the applicant's responsibility, just to be clear, the applicant's paying to construct it, maintain it. The educational signage that goes in it will work with the village so that everyone's on the same page as to exactly what signage is going up, what it says, what it's commenting on, and what part of the site's history is being attribute. So that part we will work together with the village. But in terms of the cost of the maintenance in perpetuity, that's on the applicant. In terms of an easement, there would be a public easement, because you're right, the pavilion would be located on private property, so there would be a public easement recorded against the property that allows the public access to that area of the pavilion, again, in perpetuity. So there's no questions about the public not having the right to come onto the property to access and enter and enjoy the pavilion. It was, frankly, it was designed as a tribute to the factory and as a destination for the public as they're walking on the road to the Coral Bucket to come down and visit this pavilion. So again, it would be privately built, maintained, paid for, subject to a public easement for the public's use and enjoyment. The Board of Education did speak at the Planning Board public hearing last night. We are going to open a dialogue with the school district, but I would say that VHB, the project's planner, we received the school district's comments a couple of months ago. VHB went back and did another, 20-page or so report that's an appendix to the SFEIS that analyzed again the number of school children to be generated, bless you, as well as the cost to the district. And the number of school children was based upon what's the Rutgers study that some of you may be familiar with, as well as looking at specific projects located here in the village and elsewhere in the county. So based on existing built and occupied projects and the Rutgers study, we've verified the number of school children, and we believe our numbers are accurate. And the same goes for the school costs. We've relied upon both the New York State of Education budget numbers as well as the Alston School District's numbers, and we've provided all that information. We believe our numbers are credible and accurate, but we will have a discussion with the school district to hopefully work through all that.
Oh, please.
Thank you for your presentation. I am thinking about this from a recreation standpoint. So if the sidewalk is going to be on the riverside of your driveway, then how are you going to connect it to the back of your property for access to Crowbucky? Because you've got industrial uses on the side and you're not going to be able to block those driveways. So how will that be connected to what is public property in the back?
Right.
Easement?
So the sidewalk, because there's the Clearcast and Diamond Dairy properties to the north of us, we can't go on those properties to construct the sidewalk. So the sidewalk would be ending at our property, and then the public at the end of the sidewalk will continue crossing through the Diamond Dairy and Clearcast properties the way they would today. So we're bringing the sidewalk as far as we can to the end of our site.
So how will they know that there's an access easement on the back of your property?
So we have proposed signage along our roadway that the, Crowbucky ahead, or any other directional signage to steer and to inform the public that the entrance to the Crowbucky Preserve is to the north of and the end of the road.
So are you gonna be providing any public parking for somebody that perhaps doesn't want to walk that whole length, so they could come down there and park and then get on Crowbucky and come out?
That's not part of the current proposal, but something that we could look at.
Those are my questions. Thank you.
I'm a little unclear on the entrance to Crowbucky. To access, you need to walk through Clear Cut and Diamond Dairy property. Is there an easement that already exists there?
Mr. Khan, I believe the village has secured permission from those properties for the public to walk through those properties. There's currently an entrance to the preserve at that location. So the village would know better than I about what arrangements have been worked out with those properties, but that's been an ongoing access point is my understanding.
Well, I did one time when we had a 5K 3 years ago. It was a special, but I'm not aware that that's an access point at this point. I think my understanding is the only access is from Beach Road. It would be wonderful to have access in more than one location, but.
Yeah,
Sir?
I mean, the trail ends at the bottom of the hill, and then you're kind of, there's
around.
nothing marked or anything. You just, you
I've
kind
been
of,
out there and you're at Diamond Dairy.
yeah, you're right. You're right
Okay.
at the dairy building, and you kind of, work around whatever's vehicles are parked there. I mean, there's no marked trail, to get through Diamond Dairy and through the other property. I don't know of any other. There's no agreements that I know of that we have with those, property owners with respect to that. So.
My understanding is there was a dedication a few years back as that being an entrance to the preserve, and as part of that dedication, it was part and parcel that this is where the public would access.
Happened in 2012. That's
Sorry?
helpful. It happened in 2012
2012.
was when that park was open, but I don't recall anything further
I
since
only know
I've
the formal location at Beach, which is where
Right.
the signage is.
Yeah. Sometimes they'll end up in somebody's backyard, but that's not really where formal entrance or exit. Okay. Trustee Serrera or Basemart, did you have any questions?
I don't have any comment at this time, just because I'm kind of just waiting on the end of the process to really have a overall view on where we are on the project and EAC planning. But I do thank you for an update.
Thank you.
Yes, please.
Yeah, thank you for presenting. I'm just at this moment I just need more time to digest the information that you've presented so far. But thank you.
As has been acknowledged, we've got a lot to take in tonight, but I would like to reflect back some of my questions that either you can address or Jim, if you had anything that you wanted to reflect back to us. Actually, before I ask my questions, is there something that you feel like we need to be aware of that hasn't been expressed yet?
No, I don't think so. I think Stuart will agree with me that whenever you're ready, there should be a resolution of the board referring this to
Yes.
the planning board.
Agreed.
Okay.
From the legal standpoint. Otherwise, I think you've been given an accurate picture of where it stands in the process and what the ask is.
Great. Then I just want to go through some of my questions and notes. It's okay if we don't have the answers for them tonight. I don't expect that you will in all cases.
Do my best.
You mentioned Clear Cut and Diamond Dairy. Those are the industrial buildings that are in that same, I think cul-de-sac is probably a misnomer, but I don't know what else to call it, dead end of North Water and the North Water extension. There's no plan for them to depart from where they are, as far as you know, correct? Those are privately owned properties that would just, your tenants or residents would have a nice view of them. Okay. The roof, I'm glad to hear that the EAC had commented on the roof, because that was, as soon as I saw that rooftop, I was thinking, gosh, I hope that's going to be solar or a green roof or a blue roof. That's just a lot of surface area that we could be, making good use of from an environmental perspective. I am going to follow up with some of my friends in the HPC and local historians to hear their thoughts on how there might be some valuable contribution of an historic use for telling the story at this pavilion, which I'm still not entirely clear on what the relationship is there, but I'm sure that'll be made more clear. And then this is something probably for Stuart, because as we talk about the comp plan and we talk about what people get density bonuses for, and one of the things that we all said we wanted to look at is, please explain to us what are all of these potential density bonuses that people can get, and we want to understand, do they really make sense for where we are today? So one that came up today was a 10% density bonus for LEED Gold certifiable. And my understanding for LEED certification is it can't actually be certified until after the building is constructed. But at that point, you've already got your 10 units that have been constructed. So we give you the 10% of the units. In this case, would be 13, 14, whatever it is. And do they actually go through the certification process? Because that's a New York State process, my understanding, right?
Oh, I'm sorry.
No, you're just leaning back, relaxing.
There was a lengthy discussion on that very topic at last night's continued public hearing. And one of the points that was made is it's a point schedule. And if I'm saying it incorrectly, whoever knows better than me, please. And I believe that the applicant had initially indicated LEED Silver, but he has indicated, and they have indicated, that they will do the necessary work to get to, I think it's 60 points are necessary to get to LEED Gold. So as to what needs to be done, there are a certain number of categories they already have. I think there's about 23 categories that they have, I think it's somewhere,
We have
correct me, Brad, I think you have 53, and you need another 7 to get up to 60 for the
There
goal.
are 23 that we think are likely, but they need to be developed as the design advances, and ultimately the U.S. Green Building Council has the final say as to whether those credits are accepted. So there's some discretion in the process. So
It's not New York State, it's the U.S. Green Building Council.
U.S. Green
Thank you.
Building Council, yes.
So then, Stuart, help me understand this element of our regulations. The 10% density bonus that they earn for being LEED Gold certifiable. What if they're only silver? What percentage? Do they still get 10%?
There is a hardship exception, which we talked about last night, but the applicant was very clear after he was pressed by the members of the planning board that they would in fact get gold certification. Now, in other words, they would put in, as I said, they already have 53. So, and there's then 23 remaining points. They need 7 to get themselves up to 60, which gets them to the goal.
I'm just curious, if you're silver LEED certifiable, what percentage bonus density do you get?
It's the same, in the code it's 10%.
It's 10%, whether it's silver or gold.
It's LEED Gold, but the planning board may modify it sort of down to LEED Silver based on financial hardships or their or site constraints. So what we have said is we will go for gold. So the 10% is the same. There's no, I don't believe that there's sort of a sliding scale in the code. It's a 10% density bonus for gold as modified potentially by the planning board to silver. And that was, again, lengthy discussion last night. The applicant is committed for the gold. The issue again was you don't know 100% until you go through the process, but with needing 7 more to achieve gold and 23 is likely, we're pretty confident we'll get there.
Well, it's certainly points to some interesting conversations for the EAC to have if they're going to be the folks who are particularly looking at green building guidelines for the village going forward. Because saying you're LEED certifiable and then you're never actually going to be certified, and the certification, if it were to take place, would be done after the 10% additional units were built, is really not an ideal scenario. But that's not you, that's village policy. While it's been brought up, I want to keep that in mind.
I understand this will be the second buildings that actually achieve certification in the village. Other projects have proceeded again under the certifiable. So again, that's still an evolving discussion with the planning board as to exactly what we're going to be pursuing.
Yeah, and this is, it's always a learning experience for us. It's different members of the board every time we go through this process, so learning exactly what this means and at each step of the process is important for us. So thank you for your patience. You mentioned stormwater management as an amenity. Are there special amenity versions of the stormwater management plan that's being presented, or is it just the requirement for environmental impact?
It is a requirement, and that's why we're not seeking a density bonus for it. So whether it's amenity, a public benefit, for example.
I think it's just a requirement, isn't it?
Required, yes, but
Okay.
one of the purposes of the.
It just seems like disingenuous language. That's all. Just call it an amenity. It's just a requirement for the
Well,
functionality of the property, right?
So there are some that you're right, you can't divorce it. That is it just for the project or is it just for the public? But the road is used by members of the public, not just us. So the stormwater that would be provided along the roadway is not just for our project. So it's a little bit of semantics, but we do believe it's a benefit to the village and the community down in the North Water Street area that there will be a fully new, brand new, code-compliant, safe roadway, including the stormwater management that doesn't exist today, that would improve the quality of the water discharging to the Hudson River.
No doubt. And that property will be utilized very differently than it is right now, because right now it's like, industrial trucks that drive up and down there and a few staff members, right? And you're talking about hundreds of residents.
Yeah.
So it'll be a very different use for the roadway. So there would have to be a different standard and expectation.
And I get it. We need it for the project.
Okay.
It's not totally divorced.
Did you want to comment further?
Well, I would just support your statement that that you're going to have to build a road to get to your property anyway, and you're going to have to comply with all the regulations, including the stormwater. So, to check it off as an amenity, you got to do that anyway, right? You would agree with that, right?
I do.
Okay, thank you.
When we talk about the office building, that was the historic structure that was on the property that.
That still exists.
Yeah, because it wasn't part of the demolition permit when the rest of them.
Well, there's a
Oh, I'm sorry. I think that's what the courts decided, right?
well, we've.
Okay, but we don't need to relitigate. We don't need to relitigate. It's there.
It's
It's
there.
there,
It's there.
and it's not going anywhere unless it's part of this approved site plan, correct? Okay, and it needs to go somewhere before you can build this building, obviously.
Right. I mean, it's within the footprint of
Right.
the building. I mean, we would maintain it's part of the prior demo permit, but that's not. We don't need to debate the merits of
Right,
that.
but there was
tonight.
obviously a decision because it's still there, so.
Well-
Now,
I think that also came up in planning board.
It has a number of
That
times.
took more than a few minutes discussion as well.
I'll watch the video. Thank you for calling it to my attention.
Well, yeah, I'm trying to save you all some time, but it was a very long meeting.
Yeah. Then I just want to clarify the pavilion. We've heard a couple of different versions of what that might be. At one point, there was a talk of could the building be moved? Now it sounds like the DeNardis study says that it's not stable enough to just be lifted and moved, or it could be rebuilt, or it could be reconfigured into a pavilion. The bricks could be reconfigured into a pavilion. Is that what's being proposed now?
Right. So Mayor, no, so the bricks are not of condition to be reused structurally to recreate the pavilion. So the office building is not proposed to be relocated as a pavilion. The pavilion would be a new structure with new bricks that are structurally safe and sound.
Oh, you're just talking about you just need to demolish that and get
Right,
it
so,
out of the way.
but
Oh, okay.
the artist did identify, I think it was on the front of the office building, I forget exactly where, that there were certain bricks that the artist believes could be salvaged for, again, as a commemorative display within the pavilion. It wouldn't be safe to include within the structure of the pavilion, but that could be part of the display within the open air pavilion.
Just a point also that those buildings are in the floodplain, so
Yeah.
it's, as the things have changed, those buildings, now during a 100-year flood are under 3 or 4 feet of water.
I'm so glad you mentioned that. The lower levels of this building, I kept waiting to hear that. I assume is that parking?
Yes.
Okay, nobody's living in the lower levels of this
No,
building,
and
right?
that is
Because of the
above
floodplain
the
concerns.
floodplain itself. All of the building, including the parking, is at elevation 15, which is
Oh.
above the floodplain.
Really? Okay.
So just like, yeah.
And the road is also being raised out of the floodplain.
Thank you.
The road will also be raised out of the floodplain.
I just
Yes,
wanted to
Stuart,
correct,
please.
we're talking nomenclature, so let me just
Please.
correct one thing. I know that Mr. Schwartz has said a couple of times that the fire department signed off. It should be made clear to everyone watching this, the fire department doesn't sign off on anything. What they said is that they viewed the plans and it looked okay from a fire safety perspective. We get signed and sealed plans from the applicant's engineer that say that our trucks can go in there, they can make the turns, they can do what they have to do. Fire department doesn't sign off on anything. I want that to be clear.
Thank you, thank you. We do appreciate them looking at the plans though, and
Yes.
and recognizing, and they certainly want to understand how they might be able to operate in that space, and now would be the time for them to weigh in and make sure that their concerns are being addressed. So thank you for that. Then I guess my only other question is the pavilion with however it's constructed. I've heard 2 different proposed locations. The first I had heard of it, it was near the entrance of the roadway on North Water Street, near at the village-owned property was one potential idea. And now what I'm hearing is it's on your property, right near the buildings for folks who would be going up and down the Crawbucky Trail, or just visiting.
Right, it would be on the west side of the road, accessible off of the sidewalk.
Okay.
So in the prior iteration of the site plan, it was proposed closer to our building on the site. And so at the planning board suggestion and request, it was relocated to the west side of the road, again, just off the sidewalk for easier access.
Do you need a moment?
No, we're good. I see him too often, we're good.
Is there anything else, Jim, that you
No,
think we should be aware of?
No, I don't really have anything for you to add. I mean, the planning board is working its way through it. The application also will have to go to the zoning board. You're going to get the recommendation. So it's it's an application in process. The seeker process is moving toward its conclusion. It was a lengthy meeting last night. There'll be a special meeting of the planning board in addition to its regular August meeting on August 9th, I believe, where the planning board members will be rolling up their sleeves and going almost line by line through the environmental impact statement, the final environmental impact statement.
Great.
Otherwise, I think what you've heard here tonight gives you a snapshot of where it is.
My only request would then be, Mr. Stout, that if a resolution is required or some referral to the planning board, it's not asking the board to take any judgment on the merits or take any action, but it's just a procedural step of a referral to the planning board saying, planning board, we received it, we filed it, and acknowledging receipt, and we await your referral. If that could be authorized either tonight or at the next your regular meeting, however your procedures play out, but I will let that step should then be advanced.
We can work on that resolution, that's not a problem.
Our next meeting will be August 1st. That would be, I presume, when we would vote on a resolution to make a referral to the plan.
Perfect.
Stuart's going to take it.
That's fine.
Thank you. All right. Thank you very much.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Thanks,
Thank
everybody.
you.
Good to see you, Olga.
Thank you. Okay. What's next? I do want to take. Yeah, let's take a quick break because this next topic could be in. All right. And we're back. Thank you, sir. And we're back, moving on to our discussion of affordable housing, which is an ongoing discussion. We just picked up last week mostly to recap what had happened at the joint board meeting that took place on July 10th. It was a very constructive meeting with our board, the planning board, and the zoning board. They did most of the talking. We got to hear from them, and then we sort of recapped for the public and at least what we took away as the most salient points. And this is local law 3. We're going to get to local laws 4 through 9 later tonight, though not as in depth, more in a where are we with these things, what's next. But with affordable housing, I'd like to hear from my colleagues on, well, based on the current draft and what you've been hearing and what you've been asking, what would you like to see either happen to this draft to take it to the next level, or what would you like to see as the next step? And Debbie, I didn't mean to turn it over to the board without you first
No, you go right
chiming in.
ahead.
Did I cover out
You're good.
the moving us to the next step thing? Okay. Trustee Baseball.
I'll start off. So after definitely taking input from the planning board, one of the things that spoke to me was the ability to truly incentivize units. So going forward, I think, particularly after our village manager kind of laid out the presentation about the area median income, understanding that when we are tying affordable housing to Westchester income, we will always be playing catch up. As last year, maybe 60%, or 2 years ago, 60% was ideal, because the area median income is at $117,000, and it will continue to rise as more communities do what we do. Push for more development, try to attract more people to Westchester that already have high-paying jobs, and they'll come here and live here, and therefore our area median income will continue to rise. I know in our first draft we had this whole thing about 100 or more units, doing 60 to 40. I think it's more appropriate that we still do a 20% set aside at 50% of the area median income. However, for units that are 50 or less, only do a 10% set aside. And when it comes with respect to bonus density, and again, bonus density, as I start to look at, our zoning law, only applies to certain districts. But really doing, as we ask for 20%, as we ask for a set aside, let me say that because this is different. As we ask for a set aside, doing a 40% bonus density. So, for example, if there is a property that is 22, say there's 20 acres, 20 units, and they're doing a bonus density. Well, let's just use this case in point. This is the easiest, as what we just saw. Special use permit is 22 acres, 22 units per acre at 40%. That would bring the unit count up to about 30.8. Instead of it being a 137 unit building, it would be a 170 unit building, 170 units, but you would have at least 34 units at affordable housing at 50% of the area median income. Again, 50 units or less would still get the same bonus density, but we would only be requiring 10%, understanding that smaller unit buildings might have a heavier lift. And for those who choose to really have affordable housing at the 40% area median income or less, in addition to that, we will give you 2.5 market rate units. So that won't be added to the affordable housing. So it won't be recalculated. It'll be in addition to. And this way, the hope would be that you would really get a mixed-use property, and you would have somewhat given some type of incentive that wouldn't necessarily cost you anything. That's what I kind of gathered from last week's conversation.
Yeah, I mean, I think my takeaway from this is that we've had the 10% set aside, and quite frankly, it's not really an incentive. There's nothing really there. Nothing's really worked. I think if we really want to have affordable housing and new construction, we really have to make it palatable financially for developers. And, you know, I think the proposal that Trustee Bazemore is talking about would provide, you know, the financial bandwidth to embed those lower cost apartments that would be in there. You know, I think it's something we need to develop a little more and create some examples with, but that's a direction that I would like to go. I mean, I'd also like to say that you know, I know that the planning board and the zoning board were very concerned about passing a policy, you know, before we get involved with a comprehensive plan and with other things. But in the absence of, I mean, the current plan's not working, and when we decided to do the comprehensive plan before, we passed an affordable housing policy and law before we went into the comprehensive plan. And I think that we need to make sure, because the comprehensive plan is going to be a long process. I mean, it's going to take 2 years. So the current policy is not working. It's not incentivizing anybody. I mean, nobody's doing anything yet there's still the possibility of development activity over the next couple of years. And we need to make sure that we have a policy in place that would incentivize the kind of affordable housing that we're looking for. And that's why I think it's important that we continue to massage and evolve and create a plan that actually does work, where developers would actually be incented to give us the kind of affordable units that we're looking for.
Did you want to comment?
Yeah, I just wanted to say that, so what I said before, what a lot of us have actually said before, is that the current plan, the present day, doesn't necessarily reach the average Ossining resident, right? So having an AMI at 50% actually then makes a program that actual Ossining residents can use or qualify for because of what they make. And to me, this is a program to help our current residents first, and then obviously, you know, those who come here and those who want to come here and grow here and stay here. I do like the notion of keeping 10% for 50 or less, and then going up to 20 for 50 or more, because now, as Deputy Mayor Codman said, now we're talking about actual incentives that could be discussed in examples and, you know, and broken down. So yeah.
Also, I'm sorry, I did a couple of things. You know, looking at our affordable housing policy, you know, along with that, I think at least 20% should be dedicated for the whatever the project is to 3 or more bedrooms. I do know that in a certain district, I think in one of the waterfront districts, you know, it's up to 3 bedrooms. I don't want to limit that. And I know we've seen a lot of development where we have 2 bedrooms in a den, because we say no 3 bedrooms.
People use them as the bedroom.
And people use them as a bedroom.
And, yeah.
But for some of our other residents who may be on, particularly Section 8, Section 8 would require 3 bedrooms to have a closet and a window. So it's some of those things that I think would be helpful. And also, Stewart had introduced a provision from the Tarrytown ordinance that allowed developers to come to the actual village board to do some bulk requirements. For example, in our village center, we have a 4-story building. But if a developer says, "Hey, I'm doing affordable housing, and you know, I need 5, you know, I need a 5-story building," it would actually be in conjunction with our comprehensive plan, because our comprehensive plan actually speaks about furthering affordable housing not only in our planned waterfront district but also in our village center. So I think we as a board should have the leverage to make those kind of decisions. in districts where that would make sense. Not to say that anyone's building in NC1 or NC2, but there's a maximum of 3-story buildings. And again, if they're doing the program, then they should be able to come to us and say, hey, we're doing the program, and let's look at some of the bulk requirements. If it's the difference between adding an extra story. I think we've seen instances, or one example that we don't like to talk about, 147 Main Street is 4.5 stories. We may find out, and if we talk to our planning board, that 4-story, depending on the lot size, may offer some challenges, right? So
I'm sorry, how, this is just a question, I want to forget, how many stories is Maple House? Which is right
Maple
across
House is
the
I
street?
think it's like 6 stories. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, so I mean, we have examples of larger buildings, but those are some of the things. Being having a provision that developers can come to the village board for bulk requirements to remove, or not to remove, but to make a suggestion for the sake of affordable housing, similar to what's in the Tarrytown one. Definitely making sure that 20% of all units in our affordable housing policy are actually 3 or more bedrooms. We won't sit there and decide. We won't say, oh, no more than 3, no more than 4, however it works out. And then also the 50% and 10 units or less. I mean, 50 units or less, 10% set aside. 51 units or more, that's when we actually get into the 20%. And lastly, I think we should establish our affordable housing fund. I would like to have that codified in the law. In our comprehensive plan, it actually speaks about the affordable housing fund.
It's that they opt out and they pay the fee.
And they opt out and pay the fee. I think we should just be very clear about that. Just in our code right now, it's a policy, but I would like that to actually be a part of the actual initial law.
The density bonus at 40% set aside, I wrote down, but I'm not sure that I understand it.
So density bonus would be, again, I'll give the example because it's really by district. So for this particular example, you get say you get a special use permit and you're at this particular spot. We're saying we're going to give you a 40% bonus density. That would mean that it would go, instead of being 22 units, it would be 30.8. That would be like the bonus density. So you're not.
Okay, but that only applies to you, more than 50 units.
So no. So what I'm saying is that however you get into the calculations, because again, certain districts don't, bonus densities don't apply. But we're saying whatever units that bonus densities would be applicable for, we would be given 40%. So if it's,
Thank you.
On a per project basis, because you don't.
I'm sorry, yeah,
Right,
could we play the numbers here, because I've got, I know other people have things to say, but I'm just trying to figure it out, because ultimately it's got to be written. It'd be nice if we could just talk the statutes through, wouldn't it? If it's, and Quantel, help me, if it's 50 units or more, it's a 20% set aside, and that's at 50% AMI?
If it's 50 units or less.
50, no, it's 50 units or more, I'm going.
50 or more is
51
20,
51 or
Yes,
more.
yes,
20% set
50
aside at a 50% AMI?
Yes.
Okay, and if it's 0 to 50, it's a 10% set aside at 50% AMI. So where's the 40%? That's what I'm trying to understand.
So initially, when we were doing our bonus density, we said, hey, if we're asking for a 20% set aside, we're giving a 20% bonus density.
Right.
What I'm saying is that regardless of, even though we're asking for a 10% set aside, we should give a 40% bonus density because we're doing a lower percentage AMI.
Higher incentive.
Yeah.
Now, you mentioned, I thought at one point, 2.5 units market rate. Did you say that?
Yes, so.
What was that?
So that was first, anyone who wants to go to any units that are 40% of the area median income or less, we will give an additional 2.5 market rate units.
So if someone wants to build affordable units at 40% AMI. For each affordable unit, they'll get 2.5 units of market rate.
That has been dedicated at the 40% AMI or less.
That's what I'm saying. Others,
Yes.
they do 40%. Well, but the 2.5 units, though, that's market rate units.
Yes.
So they'll get 2.5 market
Extra
rate units
incentive on top
for
of-
each one at 40% or less AMI. Is that what I'm understanding?
Yeah.
Okay. Just want to make sure. Got it. And also, you had 20% or more, I have here for, you want 20% of the affordables to be 3 or more
No,
bedrooms?
20% of the whole project to be 3 or more bedrooms.
You want to codify that into code that the project has
Percent
to?
of the affordable units, the number of the affordable units would be,
Not the whole project, correct?
Not the whole.
Just the affordable housing units that qualify, or?
well, they'd have to be across the board.
It would have to be across the board because in our code, we say that it has to be,
So you're going to, I just want to understand, you want to compel a developer to build 3-bedroom units?
yes.
What if they don't want to?
Yeah.
We used to do that.
Then you don't.
Well, I know, but, okay. So in other words, you want 20% of all units in a building have to be 3-bedroom, and of those 20, and of the affordable units have to then be in, sort of, in lockstep with the percentage that we talked before?
They'd have to be the same proportion.
Okay, I got
That's the
you.
way the law is, that's the way the law works currently, is that
No, that part I understood, I
however
didn't,
the building's laid out in terms of the size of the different apartments, it has to
But
apply.
currently, most of the new developers aren't. For whatever reason, they're not a lot that are doing 3 bedrooms. In fact, this one, I don't think they said
Well, I
any
mean-
3 bedrooms.
no,
did
they're
they?
none.
I'm not saying it's right or wrong, I'm just saying, but they're not even
No, I-
proposing a
I'm just-
3-bedroom, right?
It doesn't make money.
Quantel is,
Well, per square foot, it never would make money.
As much. They're maximizing.
Well, I don't know. So I think are you done?
Yep.
So the math for me is not only confusing. I got the 50 units in a building and all that, but the bonus density for me was a big part of the conversation of the various boards, because you keep adding more concrete to every single thing that somebody does. So even in the presentation we just saw, if they do leads, they get this, and if they do that, and if they do, I think, ADA, they get this. You start from a building that probably in our community is like 100, 125, and you end up really geometrically growing. And you think that there's an incentive because of profitability, and one of the things, because it's intuitively, you think, well, they're going to get to build more units here, so they'll make more money. Well, yes, but they're also building more units that they argue won't make money. And when you grow geometrically on both sides, you net neutral at the end of the whole equation. That was a huge part of the conversation we had a couple of weeks ago between the boards, where I don't remember who said it. I think Jeff, I'm sort of visualizing who sat diagonally across from me, and somebody on this side kept saying, you keep growing this stuff, it doesn't necessarily make more money, nor does it produce. So not that it doesn't produce more affordable housing. I think the commentary that was an eye-opener for me is, if you don't want development, keep doing this, because it doesn't make sense for a developer. So I think we have to really get the math down. I mean, I'm glad you need to do it, because you need to actually write this stuff. So the density is an issue, because this is a community that lives on side of hills and cliffs, and it isn't just about square footage, it's also about the ability to build and what it does to the structure. It's a little bit beyond my purview. The fact that you can build a 6-story one place doesn't necessarily mean that you should build 6 stories somewhere else, because one's on a cliff and one is flat. So there's a real difference, which is why we have other, citizen-driven committees, not by us, that look at this. So I'm concerned about all of this extra density on so many levels, but I'm especially concerned about the way this affordable housing, so it's not about the housing part, is run with parking. With respect to parking and what we are giving away, I think parking is an absolute disaster in this village. In so many ways, and it's been discussed, for a long time now. This is not, and buildings that we've allowed to be built 10, 15 years later, this 1.5 and 1, and then you know, they start parking on streets and this and that, and people who rent out start charging fees, so the people don't want to pay fees, so they park somewhere else. And we made an exception, I think, in this law, and you can correct me. I'm looking at you because I don't know if we've changed it since we last discussed, and I didn't read it this morning, to be honest with you. But, so the parking is still different for the affordable housing part than it is for the market rate. Is that correct?
Yeah, it, depending
and
on the
I-
size, we didn't take that out. It was one spot
Right.
if you're between 40 and 60% AMI.
And I find that exceedingly problematic, and I think that the public who's been complaining to its elected officials about parking throughout this village would agree with that. And I think parking is a big issue, and creating even more of an issue with this density, I think has to be addressed, and not in a light manner, like it's going to go away. And frankly, 3 bedrooms with a family, I understand the need for 3 bedrooms, and I understand why developers are not building them. I get that. Whether they should or not, they should, because it allows for more families to live here. The school system argues very differently about its capacity. They're at a tipping point. Maybe they weren't 5 years ago, and maybe they weren't 7 years ago, but according to them, I have no reason to doubt them, they are at capacity and at a tipping point, short of building a whole other school at this point, which will have to be paid for by tax dollars again. So I think parking is a big deal, and I think the capacity of these buildings. I think it's good to build the large apartments, but not caring about the developer one way or the other for our village. I think that you have to look at the school system and what that does when we keep adding more and more units. We've done pilots. So, John, I understand that you're saying it doesn't work. I'm not sure what doesn't work. What doesn't work is there aren't enough apartments in the village of Ossining for everybody that needs one. There isn't enough in probably 100 miles of here for everybody that needs an affordable apartment. But when we've given pilots, which is basically giving it away at 10%, it created some units. So I don't know what the goal is. Like, there isn't a metric that sits there and says, you know, what we need is this many affordable units. The metric can't be we should have lots more. There's no goal in that. There is no understanding of what we have to do for roads and schools or anything else. So we end up having discussions, which we did that night, about what the right number is. I don't know where you're getting 40%. I like the idea in concept, and I love the idea of the 50 units and the less than 50 and more than 50. I think that's very reasonable. But I have a real problem the way this is written. Families that live here, especially working families, generally have 2 cars, and to start out by saying 1 car for a unit and then talk about 3 bedroom units and still only have 1 car, I think is just a disastrous decision. I think it's an irresponsible way to write a law. For me, and that came up, and for me that's been sort of a problem that I'd like to address, because I think we have to change that number. As we do, I think we should change for market rate, but I certainly don't think we just give away and say parking will take care of itself. From what I have learned actually recently, it's not like we demand a count of how many cars you have. And on the flip side, developers are now, not developers, landlords are now charging for parking fees, which is creating more of a bottleneck on our part, which, while shameful, we don't have a way to deal with that. And this isn't dealing with it. This is a problem being created in the minute we write this law. So I'd like us to reconsider the parking issue, and I'd like us to reconsider some of these density numbers. I personally don't have the right number, so I'm not any better off today than I was 2 weeks ago, but this feels very heavy-handed and not accomplishing, which is what the boards are saying, not accomplishing the goals of creating more affordable housing. And I totally get that this is for new development. So, do we want more development or not? Are we creating a barrier, or are we really creating incentives? And I think that's, as you go through the numbers, I actually have to think about the numbers again, because I took some notes down. I got part of your numbers. The density thing, I just haven't, I have to let that sink a little bit. And it seems like you've given it a lot of thought, so you've done the numbers, but I have to sort of think about it a little bit more.
So I just want to say, with respects to one of the reasons that again that Tarrytown provision, in each district there's a certain amount of there's a certain amount of property that the actual structure can hold. If the issue is, we don't want 6-story buildings, and then we say, hey, well, you only can be on 40% of the lot, that would be an opportunity for a developer to come to the village board and say, hey, well, if you let me do 50% of the lot, then I don't have to do the extra story. With respects to parking, again, this definitely goes back to our comprehensive plan. Parking has been an issue, continues to be an issue. However, let me say this, and maybe this is where we can, as far as the parking is concerned, any district that's in the village center, any of the planned waterfront residential districts, not to say that we'll even have some in the TC in the two-family zone districts, but those areas are located in our downtown area, and pretty much would encompass kind of your TOD. Our job and what we should get to is doing two things. Is one, coming up with the proper price of parking. The proper price of parking. That is how you regulate parking. That is what communities are doing. That is what Peekskill has done. That is what White Plains continues to do. Before someone says Peekskill is a city in name, but they have the same population. I think we actually have a little more people than we have more people than they do. So when it comes to parking, we just have to get to the point of actually regulating the cost of parking. If our downtown lot that has free parking was metered, then you would be able to find a space. But because you continue to have free parking, and you don't, and because we don't have a mechanism where at certain times of the day the price changes, or in certain areas, the cost of parking should cost more than certain other areas, we have a parking issue. But I think parking should be separate. The idea is that, again, if we're talking about affordable housing, we're talking about persons at the 50% area median income. We're saying one space per unit, and in certain situations we're actually guaranteeing a parking space. But at the target audience that we're talking about, they may not actually have a car because they can't afford it. So
Actually, I don't think you are guaranteeing a parking space. It doesn't say that they get a space. It says that the developer has to build a space per unit. It doesn't say they can't charge for it. And it does, and honestly, Quantel, to use pricing in a community like ours is like another tax on people. There are only so many square feet. You can't price people out of this. You're actually now saying, let's create affordable housing, and then let's charge them more. You're not suggesting charging less, you're suggesting charging more to the same people who are trying to work and get to work and need that transportation. It doesn't, for me, that's not a genuine way to look at it. I think we can work through that, but it needs to be at least rethought. But the idea, so the pricing concept, I haven't bought it. The year that you've been discussing it, I think it's unfair to those people who have the least amount of money, because it isn't just about pricing. So, I mean, let's be real. And also, it doesn't say that they get a parking spot. It says that you build enough parking spaces based on units. It doesn't say that the landlord can't charge. I did get a note, thank you, from someone who understands this a little bit more, and says that generally speaking, the developer doesn't charge the people in the affordable housing. This affordable housing piece doesn't state that those parking spaces are designated for the affordable housing folks, or that someone can't charge them a fee. And in fact, we have this all over the village, and you know this. People figure out they have to pay. It's like paying another tax or paying another rent. So they move their car somewhere else, usually in front of somebody's house, usually in a place that then is problematic during the snow. Where are they supposed to park? So that's not a solution. It really isn't. And I think the pricing scenario really doesn't resonate with people who live here and know that we have a parking problem in many areas, in many different zones in this village. So I think that needs to be looked at. All I'm saying is I'm not solving it here. I really do think parking needs to be revisited in a realistic manner.
Well-
And not for the next year,
So
the
I can,
next 10 years.
so I can speak for, with respects to properties like Harbor Square, Avalon, the practice has been that each unit gets one parking space, and that's been a part of their like they weren't charged for it, like that it has to be a part of it. So my understanding, if you got Harbor Square, regardless of your bedrooms, you get one parking space, and what developers do with the other one is charge for it, and people have to pay for it. Or if there is if there's
Affordable units aren't usually eligible to be able to pay for it.
Exactly.
It goes beyond the percentage.
It goes beyond that, right?
Absolutely. So in the case where there is, off-street parking, but still part of the property, they typically park on the outside, whatever the case may be. So either way, if we're requiring each unit, 2 parking spaces, or 1.5 parking spaces, because, if you look at our code, you could,
1.5.
depending,
Yeah.
it could be 1.5.
Right.
When you get to NC district, you actually might have to do more.
Right.
So it's not to say that they were going to get, if you had a 3-bedroom apartment or a 2-bedroom apartment, you were getting 2 parking spaces or the half a parking space anyway. What we're just saying is that, hey, for this unit, that half that we would actually make you have to get into your numbers, you don't have to do that. With respects to you not buying
I
into,
mean, I'll let you finish,
Okay.
but seriously, you're not giving anybody half a space. It's the way they build it. So 10 equals, if it's 1.5, it's 15 spaces. It's not that an individual gets, come on, right?
granted, so that's what I said. But also, you may not. I won't debate with you on. Well, listen, we can agree to disagree about
Yeah.
pricing of parking. We can always disagree. Agree to disagree on that because, if
We have for a year.
yeah, and we
Totally get it. We disagree on this.
and we just will.
I get it. Not fighting with you, I get it.
Yeah.
Trustee Herrera, did you have any thoughts?
Yeah, so this is the good. I think that the revised proposal that kind of got us started just in the conversation about having a real incentive, right? It's kind of been accomplished tonight, which is good. And we have already taken into account what we learned from that last meeting about having a conversation about a real incentive. Obviously, we haven't come to a consensus, or as Deputy Mayor Codman mentioned, we don't have an example yet to actually forward it, but it's a good first step to actually go into what an incentive means. As far as parking, we definitely went off on a tangent on that. However, I do understand why it was brought up because it definitely is in relation to prospective development. However, parking needs to be a whole different conversation because of how we enforce it, about how we price it, about how the regulations are actually written. The person who lives in downtown, wait till you hear my story in 2 weeks about parking. And we also have to, in the comprehensive discussion that I think we should call for parking, we need to discuss that the parking challenges are different depending where you are in the village, right? So obviously it's much different for the downtown. It's much different for the waterfront area. It's much different if you live by Cortlandt Ridge, aka Claremont Gardens. It's much different, and how we enforce parking, how we permit parking, how we charge for parking also changes depending where you are in the village. And unfortunately, that is at times our fault with what has come from all of that. As far as I like the idea of looking into, in this particular draft, an easy revision that I think we'll all agree on is to continue the common practice, if it is really common practice, to add 1 space per affordable unit. That's an easy thing to just add in the revised,
That's not what it says.
No, I'm saying for us too.
Oh, I see. You want to
that's-
maybe look at that.
That's
Okay, I get it.
that's an easy thing to just, have on the draft and discuss how to bring about it.
Right.
Um,
Oh, I see what
but-
you're saying.
But as far as parking goes, we could literally be here for the next 3 hours, but I want to have a very, I want data, I want analysis, I want facts, I want, when it comes to parking, because that's going to be a whole separate conversation. So I just don't want us to segue, because to me, this conversation at first was really for us to have a better understanding on, on density, which the comprehensive plan does call for, incentive, which all the land use boards agreed that we should have a real incentive. So I just want to, it's easy to get off of on tangents that are as important as this. But parking isn't a hot mess in Ossining because of the affordable housing policy currently, nor the prospective one. It's because of us. And by us, I mean the entity, so not this board. But
No, I actually, yeah, it's not a tangent. So local law number 3 that we're discussing for affordable housing, there was a change recommended by a trustee to change the parking requirement, specifically in this for affordable law. Am I right or am I wrong about that? From what the standard was before. It's not 1.5, it's 1, because it's more,
In
because
this
of the
local law,
density.
in this local law now, it's 1 for between 40 and 60% AMI. That's what we have in here now. In the local law,
Now-
that's what's in there now.
Right, and that's my point, not a discussion about parking. That was simply a point about this law. as
It is a
specific
reduction in the number.
that I am suggesting is not an appropriate way to go as regards this particular law that we are discussing, not the topic of parking for the Village of Ossining.
Okay, this is my request when we're talking about how we may account for parking for affordable units, 46% area median income in local law number 3. We have a planner who's going to be starting with us in a few weeks. I believe that this recommendation that's being made by Trustee Bazemore is grounded in something that planners have studied, not just talking about our experience with various neighborhoods and people in Ossining. So I would like to understand why that might be recommended from a planning perspective when you're talking about affordable units. And then I'd also like to delve a little deeper. If we're talking about 3 bedrooms versus 1 bedrooms, is there a way to distinguish, is there a link between how much parking may be needed for a 3-bedroom that might be different than a 1-bedroom? That may not be the case in affordable, but the resident expert we will soon have on staff next month, it could probably help us understand this a little better. Does that, because I assume this is coming from someplace,
Yeah, I
not
mean,
just your idea.
I just want to say, River, the RDD district, 1 parking space. If we're talking about 2 or more bedrooms, it's 0.5. The IR, no one's building over there. The CCD district, again, for 2 bedrooms is 2 spaces, but we're saying for an affordable 1, you still have the requirement to provide 2 spaces per, for the market rate. The 1 bedroom is 1.5. Again, you're knocking off 0.5. The special, I guess the special use permit. Again, it's really it's 1 for it's 1 for 1 bedrooms and 1.5. I mean,
Special use.
we're I personally, I mean, just looking at the numbers, we don't have any place that's requiring 3 or 4 parking spaces per unit. So I think it's, you're not, you might just go from, if it's the example that I just used there, you might be losing, 10 or 12 parking spaces, in a development that is being required to really build.
Understood. And really what we're trying to do is we're trying to find the right balance between not discouraging development and encouraging the kind of development that we want to see more of. I'm looking at the PowerPoint that you shared with us, and I know it's not comprehensive as far as all properties for potential future development, but it's a good sampling that covers most of what's there, and it identifies the units that are in the planning process. And I just did the math very simple math. It was an addition problem of all of the proposed units that are in various points in the planning process. And one of those, the very largest one, is 198 units. That is actually not truly in the planning process. It's just coming to us, asking for us to create a zoning text amendment, and we'll be looking at that later this fall. So, you know, a third of what I'm about to say is not even, you know, in the planning process yet, but theoretically, that's 601 units that have been suggested, or in some cases, in the case of Hudson Step, 189 units have actually been approved. They just are, you know, looking for a financing option that would work for them for the design that they have. And we see 80 Main Street is coming along. So you said nobody's doing anything. They are. Nobody's doing beyond the minimum, but building is happening, and we've certainly seen a lot of it happening in recent years, and it's still happening, and with more that's in the process. That's what we did for the first hour of tonight. You know, I grew up in North Tarrytown. I look at Sleepy Hollow. They're about to add 1/3 of their population. They're about to increase their population by 1/3. They've already started. And it is very much going to change the socioeconomic dynamic in that community. I don't want to see that happen in Ossining. And if every single time somebody comes in and builds 100 and 200 unit buildings, 90% of their units are market rate and luxury, and 10% are middle income housing, which is what we have right now, we are inherently changing the demographics of our community. And there are people who think that's a good idea. And this board does not, for the most part, what I'm hearing. And what I heard from all the land use boards we met a couple of weeks ago was we want to preserve the socioeconomic diversity of our community. The affordable housing policy we have right now is not helping us preserve that. And so thank you to Trustee Bazemore for giving us a suggestion, a proposal to be able to react against. I don't think we've necessarily come to the right number, but having a breaking point at the 50 units, and then having it become increasingly, give incentives to make it more affordable, more feasible for developers to come in and be able to incorporate more of the units at a 50% area median income as opposed to 60. That's more progressive than actually we were talking about before when we were talking about 20% set aside. The Tarrytown, so two things, more points I want to make. One of them is I would not be supportive of any inclusion in this law that brings more development back to the Board of Trustees to be another layer of review. Even though I understand the reason you're suggesting it, because I watched Harbor Square, which was over a decade of politicized development, and actually, I think what is a process that works well in other communities, and it's actually something we included in our DRI application. We've seen it in New Rochelle is the one that we hear about the most, where you do the overlay zone and you have you're the one who talking about master developers coming in, and you make a really clear set of parameters of what it is you want your community to look for, and they come in, and then 60 to 90 days they go through their planning process because everything was so clearly laid out, and then they don't spend years going through approval processes and political boards and multiple layers of approval process, because we figure it all out in advance. Then they have more money to be able to invest in the actual building. We have better quality buildings and buildings that better meet our goals. And so I'm just inherently, philosophically not supportive of the idea of including another opportunity for a development to come to the Board of Trustees. So that piece of it, but that's pretty minor. The bigger thing is, anytime we do a law, we want to do it right. We want to do it as well as possible with as much thoughtful consideration as possible. Absolutely, and that's why we are taking so much time with this. But when I look at the actual properties where there is a possibility for any significant development, not considering the ones that are in the planning process, even though I realize some of those are so early in the planning process, they could potentially be subject to any new policies that we're discussing now. But the vast majority of them are village-owned properties. And like the Flavel is in the, I went and looked at that property. That's not going to be a big affordable housing development, even though it's a lot of acres. And Sandy Drive is not either. But we're really talking about, the big ones are Market Square in the heart of our downtown, the old DPW site at Lower Central Avenue, and then a mix of village-owned and privately owned on Main and on Secor Road. And then the private properties, well, I'm doing this because my neighborhood is the nursery on Croton Avenue. It's a block for me. I don't know what that's going to be. Well, that's yet to be seen. It's less than an acre. It's not going to be more than 50 units, I wouldn't imagine. I don't think that's even possible. No, we're talking about much less, right? And there's not even a proposal yet. So that would be subject to whatever. That's very likely if we march this through and we get something on the books. That's one of the private properties. So we want to get it right, and there are certainly always potentials for buildings to do dramatic redevelopment, for something to happen. 147 was built after 20 years after a fire. So like we want a law in place that is going to further our values, but if what we as a village want to see happen is something really progressive, we can. And I know you said it's only as good as the people who are on the village board. So this would be the bare minimum, presumably. But if the village board wants Market Square to be mixed-use, mixed-income housing in a much more interesting and progressive manner, it's actually a lot more feasible when we own the property, because they don't have to spend a lot of money on the property, and we can help work with them to get incentives and state funding to be able to achieve a more progressive mix of housing. So we're talking about creating this law for what is really, because we are so dense and built and such a small footprint to begin with, a relatively small number of buildings in total. So I want to get it right, but we spent a lot of time trying to figure it out. So I don't think if we get it wrong, it actually is going to have that big of an impact. I guess that's what I'm saying, because where we own the properties, we actually have so much more influence.
So
If I may, I just want to, I agree, but I don't want to limit ourselves to just the selected few private properties that we listed on that PowerPoint, or the select parcels that we own at the village, because there may be other properties, commercial or residential, and they on their own, depending on what they're able to do with our land use laws, can develop and go through the process as so this law would also affect that, right, if it is residential. So I don't want us to just focus on what's at hand. I want us to, I want this law to also be considered for future projects that haven't even been thought of in other projects, if that even comes to be, right? Because I know that everyone sees what's in the pipeline, whether it's proposed or just at the planning stage. But I do want the policy to just go beyond this 1 year, or 2 years, or 3 years, or 4 years, or 5 years. That if Deborah owns a couple of properties in an area where she can build this or that, or mixed use, whatever, that
Don't get Debbie in trouble.
I'm just, no, because I want to set the tone that it's what a lot of investors say, whether you're in business or real estate, everything is for sale, whether it's for sale or not, right? So, and that's true, and it happens all over Westchester. It's happened in Ossining. It could be for a business purpose, commercial purpose, residential purpose, but that is that. As far as the timing, I think it's very important to know that, and I keep saying this because housing is a limited and rare commodity, and because we had the potential of displacement due to us finally addressing our code violations, more housing is going to be needed, right? So that's why this has been a priority, and why in a way people's housing and a roof over their head is a little bit more important, at least to me, having a place to actually stay and shower and eat. So I'm happy that seems like we're just a little closer to having a policy that could actually benefit people that live here now that otherwise wouldn't be able to stay here. So that's all.
All right, I just want to clarify because I'm so glad we kind of had this presentation and really talking about bonus density. I do want to go on the record and say that bonus density does not affect every single zoning district. Bonus density does not affect the village center. The village center you can put as many units as you want to as long as you fit within the 4-story building. So the difference between say with the minimum size. So if the larger lot you have, if it's 4 stories, you can fit more, vice versa. The bonus density does, however, affect the player and waterfront residential districts, the RDDs, the TODs, the ones that actually offer the ones that require a special use permit. So if the difference between 22 to say 30 acres per unit. That's what we're talking about with the 40%. I don't want people walking away. I actually, the way that we described it before was sort of inaccurate with some of our examples. So now knowing that, being able to see the presentation, these numbers don't really seem as far-fetched unless you're one that says, unless you're one to say, 22 acres, 30 units per acre, like if that does something for you, the difference between 137 and 170. Now, if you're just opposed to a development and you're like, we really don't need to have as many large buildings, that I understand. So I just want to go on the record and say that with respect, and again, I understand, the idea of, not wanting to have decisions come before the board, but this provision would actually be for if people want to actually give us more than what we're asking for. If there's something in a situation where our zoning says the building can only be on 40%, but we say, hey, we're going to give you the extra 10% so you can be on 50% of the property. I want that. I want that ability. And not for nothing, we actually, we actually have the ability. Like the state, New York State gives us that power. So all I'm doing is asking that it actually be codified and saying, with respects to affordable housing policy, this is what we can do in those instances where, again, if it ever comes up where there's because of how we're doing it by units, a developer may say, hey, I'm going to build under 50 and just do bigger units for 10% set aside. But if they say, hey, based on my property, I need to do 67 units, I want the ability for the village board to say, okay, I know you normally are limited to a 4-story, but we can go 5 or whatever the case may be.
So a couple of things. Like for the example we had tonight when we had Hidden Cove come, because they're in a location where they're at the bottom of steep slope. We have a lot of that in Austin. We are a village of hills, and so where there is a question of height, sometimes it's really not that much of a concern. And the reality is we're just over 3 square miles. The reason we have all of these zones and these different regulations in each one is to try and be, to create zoning for what makes sense in that zone, which should eliminate the need for too much. So people can do things as of right because we've created the as of right circumstance that makes sense in that neighborhood. So we could probably do that even better or do that even more. This whole thing is going to go through the secret process. We're going to get an environmental impact report on this local law, right? So the other concern is not just whether we want to do height variances or open space variances, and what it would look like or what it would feel like in any given neighborhood. Having a 6-story building in some neighborhoods might feel different than it would in others. It's what would be the effect on our environment, and then does the environmental impact look just at stormwater runoff and traffic, or is it also looking at impact on schools?
Yes.
Is it also looking at impact on all of the village resources?
Yes.
So, okay, so
we're going to get a pretty thorough assessment of if whatever we put forth as our proposal, it's going to be well vetted from an impact perspective, and environmental is used pretty broadly in that regard.
Yes, it is. Just to follow up something that Trustee Bazemore was saying, in Peekskill, for example, in their waterfront district, they have what is basically a height density bonus. So
Oh.
they allow you to put an extra floor on a building. And if you get that bonus, what you do is, to do it, you pay for that. You pay 15% of the assessed value of the floor, and you pay that into a fund that will be used to build a parking garage, stormwater system, or some amenity that would benefit the entire city. Actually, there's a couple of municipalities that do that, where they have a specific, what they basically call it a floor density, and you can essentially go up one floor. Some places it can only be a 15th, but whatever, you can do something like that. I just had one question, Trustee Bazemore, just help me. The bonus density, in other words, the 40%, that is not across the board, or does that depend on the particular district that we're going to be in?
I mean, it depends on it depends on the particular district. There are districts that don't. There are districts that don't. There's no minimum acre. There's no minimum units per acre. I mean, again, we've said that we were doing this 6 or more.
Right.
So like you would have to, you would have to be doing at least
Right.
6 units.
Understood.
And then 2, density doesn't look the same in every district. I'm just looking at.
That's what I mean, though. It's like on a per project basis.
So really, again, I keep talking about the PWAs, Bs and the Cs and the RDDs and the Station North Plazas. This is where the policy is gonna, with respects to bonus density, it's gonna actually affect you. Now, if you are in the VC and you have 50 units or less, 10%, and you work it how you work it out. If we have a provision that says, hey, you know what, we're going to look at bulk requirements, and let's just say we're going to say, oh, you know what, instead of doing 1 bedrooms, I want to do micro units for 1 bedrooms, right? And this is how we'll work those numbers out. Then you can come to us and say, hey, this is how I kind of want to facilitate more affordable housing, which again, micro units, at 40% earning income might be more doable than requiring 1 bedrooms at,
That's a really great point. You brought that up last time, but how did we fit that into the law with micro units? What do they count as?
It's not allowed at all.
It's not allowed at all. So
Right,
that's
so
why.
Are you suggesting that we add it? Are you suggesting that
I'm
we
sugge-
think about it? I mean,
Nope, I'm
that's what I'm
suggest-
trying to ask here.
I'm suggesting that we have a provision that allows us to waive bulk requirements, and then when we have a developer who's coming in the door saying, hey, I have this nifty idea, we can say, hey,
Well,
I'm interested.
to that point, I don't want to give up my right that has been given as an elected official at this table, just because it takes the weight off of me, or because I don't think it should be me, or I don't, so I'm definitely,
Nobody's suggesting that they would.
No, I'm just.
Was there an
I'm just saying-
understanding that
I'm
that
just-
was the suggestion?
I'm just saying what I'm saying, but I feel that, everyone on their own can make, the best judgment. And unfortunately, I agree. In the past, with other projects that have come to the board, that have been very controversial, that everyone has learned from that. But I'm not going to use that as fear to not exercise an option to work with the developer to better fit our needs, if that opportunity does come to be. So I agree.
I wonder if I could just make one point, because it's important with all this. A lot of the things we've talked about, the micro units, things like that, a lot of that are text changes to the zoning code. They're
Oh, I
not
see.
part of affordable housing. So if you're talking about wanting to do micro units, we don't define that at all in our zoning code. And without that, you need that first, because you're going to need that basis, because in all these things, in all the other statutes, for example, in Peekskill, where I just talked about the bonus height, that appears in their zoning code. It's not part of their affordable housing. And then it ties back in, because again, it's 2 different types of bonuses. But my point is that some of the things that we have here everything has to be consistent with the zoning code. Either it's going to have to be a change to the zoning code, or that what we're going to plan now is consistent with what currently exists. But we can't have the two in tension, is basically what I'm saying.
So if, the comp plan is a much heavier lift, but if there's modifications to the zoning code that we feel should be made on a parallel path to changes to the affordable housing policy, that could happen, whether it was micro units or some other zoning text amendment. That's something that we could be moving forward.
You could, you refer it to the board, to the planning board for a recommendation, and it comes back to you
Yeah.
for a vote, yes.
Okay, and that doesn't have to go through a whole secret process and such, that's.
It would, the county would be notified of it, and they would let us know what their thinking is. It depends on the nature of the
How
change.
extensive it is, okay. And then just because we're talking about it, I just want to throw it out there, and ask a question, and maybe a planner would be the best qualified to answer, but if we, for either a portion of the village or more, moved forward with form-based codes, how would that impact local law 3? It wouldn't. Okay.
I'd wait till August 6th when I can ask someone who really.
But your inclination, Debbie, is that it wouldn't
Yeah, I
it
don't-
wouldn't make a difference.
I
It
don't,
would-
I
it
don't
would
think
just-
so,
great.
because I think that whatever laws are in place, we take those into account when we're developing the form-based codes.
Just for the public's sake, can someone just define that briefly? Form-based codes.
Sure.
Form-based code is a mechanism where we actually define as a village exactly what we want in certain locations and create the specifications for how that would look and how it would be built. And then one step a little further, which is doing a little bit of the environmental assessment up front so that that's done, so that we know that that building can be built in that location the way we want it. So it actually becomes a nice little picture in our book so that developers can go and they can see exactly what we're talking about. It's a lot easier to understand, and it provides more flexibility to the board and what you want to see.
So for the purpose of the conversation, I just wanted to make sure, that there were some takeaways here after we've had ample conversations.
You should review them.
Yes.
To be clear.
So the idea of moving the set aside to 50% of the area median income, is there enough agreement on the board for that?
We're talking about a draft.
A draft, like, so that he
I
could.
mean, we're talking about a new draft, right?
Yeah.
Draft change.
Yeah, the draft change.
Am I?
Yes.
Yes.
All right. Is there?
The yes is from who?
I
don't
don't know
understand
what
what's
that would
happening
mean
here.
at this point.
Okay, so
I understand the
yeah.
words you're saying. I don't
Right.
know what the impact of that would be, because there's concern that the impact of 60% area median income is, and I understand the concern. At the same time, in 2006, when we passed this one, people were probably concerned, and it's been more than fine. So I just don't know realistically what that means from a developer perspective.
Okay.
My understanding is that you were proposing a draft change so we could look into what you proposed.
Absolutely.
And then John said yes, and then I
Yeah.
said yes.
Okay,
Is
great.
everyone clear on what was asked as far as the proposed draft change, where we could either ask questions, move forward, or explore the proposal at hand? I just want to make sure that we're all understanding what Trustee Bazemore is asking tonight.
What's the draft change, Stuart? Don't, you have
Well,
to
the-
do
the-
it, right?
I mean,
Maybe we should ask Stuart, what do you have
Yeah,
as,
what
if
is-
you're
what
moving
is it
forward
that
to
you think
doing
you're
it,
doing?
with, providing us with a new draft, what is it that you are
Yeah.
understanding should be included in it,
I
and
have-
if we've missed something or
I
changed
have the following. That for 51 units or more, it's a 20% set aside at 50% AMI. From 0, or actually, I shouldn't say, from 6 to 50 units, it's a 10% set aside at the 50% AMI. In those units, or in those zones where there is already a bonus density, the bonus density would be a 40% bonus density from where it is, where it currently is. Was a suggestion that 20% of the new construction needs to be 3 or more bedrooms, and that would then translate down to in terms of affordable units as well. And I know there was some suggestion by trustee Bazemore with regard to giving certain authority to the Board of Trustees with regard to certain bulk requirement decisions. And I don't know if there was any, I mean, that's just, again, for a draft. And on parking, I know there were a lot of different views, so I don't think there was anything specific in terms of a change. I know that I can hear the disagreement
Let's ask
here.
Tracy for some recommendation on what.
That's right, that's what I have here. So that's what I have in terms of our
Yeah,
discussion here.
The only additional element to this was the,
2.5 units.
the idea that
Right.
if the developer, within the number of affordable units that was dedicated, under the scheme, whether it's 50 or below or 51 or above, that anything at 40% AMI or lower, that they would get 2.5 market rate units for every unit they decided to do at 40% or lower.
Okay, so this is that's what because I'm hearing 40% at two different places here. There's a 40% density.
The 40% density that's the bonus that you get for doing affordable
Fine,
housing, period.
Fine.
But
But if they're doing 40% AMI,
right,
you will then get for each affordable unit at 40%.
Right.
You'll get 2.5 market rate units.
that's correct.
Yes.
Got it.
So-
I mean, I understand what you want. Let me say that.
I have two questions. Before we move off of this topic, and we certainly have more to discuss, but we use the term bonus density. When we talk about affordable housing and the affordable housing policy, and we use the term bonus density, I find it to be rather a misnomer, because we're not giving them this as a bonus. We're saying you must build these units. You must incorporate a certain amount of your units must be affordable units. So what we're essentially saying is whatever the ratio is that has been previously determined to be an appropriate density for the land use in our community, we are now upping that. We are just increasing the density. That is the standard by 40%. Because this isn't, you're not doing anything special, you're doing it what you're legally required to do. So if you're building, I mean.
not an option.
It's just so silly to me to say, because there is no, there is no way, you can't say as of right you could build 60 units on this lot. But you're also required to build an extra, what would that be? 12 on top of that, so 72? No, double that. It would be 24 on top of that. So now you're going from like 60 to 84. That is actually the as of right. It's just that 24 of them are affordable.
You have to start with your, again, the density as far as per acre. If you're talking about the spaces that are where you have to do a special use permit at 22 acres, 22 units per acre. Now you're saying 30 or 31 units per acre. That's what you're saying. So with respects to the way that we've been talking about this earlier, it was probably inaccurate, because again, the bonus density would only be in reference to where you actually can apply for the special use permit in those designated districts. In a village,
What are you talking about the special use permit? Why is that relevant to this?
because the bonus density is only relevant to where there's a special use permit.
Why am I not understanding?
No, and let me talk it through, because maybe this will help me as well. I'm coming into Ossining. I wish to build 6 units, the bare minimum. So under what we're saying, because I just want to follow this through, I have to, 20% of those units have to be affordable. Correct?
No, he said anything under 50 originally.
So 10%.
So this would be
fine.
under 50,
Yeah, so-
10%, which it is
in that
today.
situation,
Right.
does the
Doesn't
40% number come in at all?
The density? No.
Yes.
Yes, that's what
No.
he's asking.
That's what, so in other words, the density which you're talking about only comes in the PW, ABC, IR, and CDD districts?
Pretty much, because that's where you have the actual How else did you?
Well, because that's much different than what we have here, because I think here we were basically applying the density
Across the board.
across the board.
But how can we apply the density across the board and say in a village center district?
Well, depending on, because it simply went by the number that you would be permitted, that you're looking to build, and then you simply multiplied off of that. That's how it was, that's how it's been
So which is
calculated.
why the term bonus density should be abolished. Because it doesn't, we are creating a local law for affordable housing, and the term bonus density is not relevant in some districts, right? Because you can only make an envelope but a particular size in some districts, and in other districts, but
Right.
Can't we just say applicable to the following districts?
Well, you can easily do that.
Or can we say applicable to districts that actually
Stuff, I mean,
have a density?
You can easily do the districts that have a per acreage density.
Yeah.
so then in the districts that don't have per acreage density, how do we ensure that they are including an adequate amount? Then you just do the math backwards? You take
No,
what
if-
is your total amount, and X percentage of them will be affordable?
Absolutely.
I would think that in those districts, if I understand, if they're constructing 50 or less, between 6 and 50, it's 10%. And if it's 51 or more, it's 20%. And if they are doing anything that it's at 40% AMI, then that's where you get a real benefit, because then it's the 2.5 units at market rate for each one affordable.
Why are,
That's just what I'm being told, or hearing.
Because realistically speaking, like for all the big projects though, you had to get the real big ones, you have to have a special use permit, essentially.
but
There's
not
no,
necessarily related to affordable housing.
No, it's
But
not.
I'm
The
not saying
special
that.
use permit is, that's
Yeah.
correct. The special use permit is not
Yeah.
affordable, has no connection
for the
to
bigger
affordable.
developments.
for the bigger developments, that's what I'm saying. That's where the 40% actually comes in at, because now you're talking about your per acre. But if you're building on Main Street, you can build according to what can fit in the envelope. Like there is no number. Basically, what the code says is you can pretty much build on, I think, 90% of the property, and you can do 4 stories, and I guess based on your property line will determine how many units you have, or how many units you can pull out.
Your setbacks would determine the size of what you can actually put there, because that's your bulk requirements, height,
Yeah.
width, and all that, correct?
And so then, and so for the village center, or I guess then you would, again, if it's 50 or less, 10%, 51 or more,
So it
20%.
sounds like it's really realistically only for those new developments that are more than 50 units. I mean, 50 or 51, more than 50. Otherwise, it really doesn't even apply. Because it only starts at 20%.
50% area median income, though. It's a lower AMI, though. Okay.
But she's talking about the density bonus. I don't
Yeah.
know. But, so it just seems to me that actually under 50 units, the 40% doesn't seem to apply anyway.
No, so if you have 50 units and you want to,
When would it?
so again, if you get the 2.5 units, we're not recalculating. Let me just be clear about that. So like if you have 50 units and you say, hey, I want to put one at, or I want to do 2 apartments at 40% of the area median income, then you get, 5 additional apartments. Now you're at 55. So you're at 50 market rate and 5 affordable. And so anything that you get out of the 2.
It's not how the density, it's not how it works. It's if I put, it's
Oh,
plus.
10, I'm sorry.
Right.
So yes, you're at 60. So you're at,
You just went
yeah.
from 50 to 60.
yes, 55.
Okay.
55 market rate, 5 affordable. And that's if that's something you're interested in. And we're not going to sit up there and say, oh, you're at 60 now, so now, give us 12 units. No.
Of course you will, because it's a percentage game, and whoever sits on the board is gonna say that's what the law says, but I'm not sure how relevant that is. I mean, I think your point is more about the bigger picture than about, you know, but it's a lot more units. Both market rate and affordable. It keeps going up together.
Yes. So do you have,
John wanted to say something.
No, I was just going to make the suggestion that we get Stuart to put the draft together, and then we can start to kind of create the different scenarios that we're going to need to look at to see if it's really doing what we want to do. So.
And then I also just want to know, when we get to the stage where we're doing a draft environmental impact statement, normally the first round of that is paid for by a developer. In this case, that will be paid for by the village, I presume.
and out of curiosity, why are we doing a draft impact statement?
Well, generally, you need to do a SECRA review anyway, because, and the question is, does it come up with a negative? If it's a positive declaration, you have to do an EIS. They haven't gotten to that stage yet, but if you do, if the board determines that, it's the lead and it's going to do a positive declaration, then you have to go the EIS. And since there's no developer here, it would be the village that would be doing its own environmental impact statement of the impact of that. But again, if it's a negative declaration, there's no EIS required.
Okay.
So I just want to know what about this is what normally, I guess I'm asking just from a general standpoint, would we have to, because we're dealing with zoning, is that the reason we're doing SECRA? Like, what is the?
Generally, with a change of law like this, the cases indicate that even as it relates to affordable housing, because it does have potential environmental impacts, it is something where, at a minimum, you have to do what's called a short environmental assessment form. You can also do a long environmental assessment form, and then the board can look at that and make a determination as to whether the impacts are significant enough to warrant what's called a positive declaration. But basically, for changes like this, which could have some environmental impact, you need to do the SECRA. We also have to notify the Westchester County Planning Board, because they will opine on that. But we can't go into that until we actually have something to show them. But when we do, we have to get their impact. Where Tracy will take a very big benefit.
Okay, and can you just, on your free time, just provide me with case studies that indicate the kind of, where communities have made this provision and they had to kind of go through the SECRA process?
Well, I can give you cases where the courts have found that affordable housing is a proper situation where SECRA has been followed. That I can do. I would have to. I don't have the availability to get a case study where on an affordable housing the specific SECRA that was done. I'd have to go back to the DEC archives and see if they have that. But there's case law where the courts have found that review of an affordable housing law is an action for which SECRA is warranted.
Was that for overlay zones or just?
No, that was just for an affordable housing.
Okay, all right.
How much do you think that costs? I mean, not a lot.
I wouldn't
assume.
even hazard. I mean, Tracy would be. I seriously, because I actually don't know.
This poor woman's never going to want to come off her
No, you're
vacation
right,
and show up.
that's
We're going to get such a long
I'll-
list.
Actually, I'll ask some of the people who were here tonight, because.
Yes.
Because they know, right,
Jim would
because
know.
they've done
Right,
it.
I'll be happy
That's
to.
right, that's very smart.
Two other things that were mentioned that I don't know if we're ready to include them in a draft, but I thought was interesting was how we would codify the affordable housing fund. And I mean, eventually I'd love to see that get to another level of how then it could really be. I don't know how much we actually say in our code right now of.
We actually don't say much at all. I mean,
Okay.
but there's no reason that the language as to what the fund is cannot be codified and simply say that, refer to our fee schedule if you want, in terms of what the number is, because we may.
'Cause that can
the
change
board may
more
change it
easily,
each year. But you can absolutely have, most codes actually make reference to what their fund is and what those funds should be used for.
Have we ever?
We've discussed that before, actually.
We
Like,
have,
the
yeah.
numbers, we've gone all over
Right.
the globe with that, but we've all agreed that something has to be done. We just don't know the numbers, huh? Have we what?
Have we had an opt-out? Like, has a developer paid money to us?
This, yeah.
No.
Harbor Square.
That was a special development fund, which was
Oh, okay.
different than the Affordable Housing Fund. But your Affordable Housing Fund legislation would be done under finance, because that's where you create the funds.
Then the other topic that you brought up, which I'm not exactly sure would fit in, we've talked a lot about height and zoning and where bonus densities are eligible, is the story fee or whatever it is they have in Peekskill, where if you want to build a little higher than is anticipated, that there's money that can then be put into a fund that is a special purpose fund, whether it's parking or some communal good
Right.
fund. I like that in concept because sometimes we insist that a developer do X, Y, or Z because those are things that we care about. But if we had an alternative where they could put money into a fund that then could be utilized by the village in some other capacity, then it might give us more flexibility.
For example, Peekskill says that for this particular bonus height, there would be you get it if you make a payment into an infrastructure fund to be managed by the city manager or his designee to be used for municipal improvements within the waterfront district, so it's specific to that district, including but not limited to parking facilities, water and sewer, stormwater management, and flood control.
Sounds good. Well, we've remarkably spent almost an hour and a half on it. I'm sorry.
No, I would say it's an interesting concept, but I would leave it just on the waterfront district, because I think wherever you build, that area should benefit from a fund for improvement.
Right.
So I wouldn't limit it, because maybe there's something that will be built in 3 years somewhere. Building comes down, another one goes up, what do I know? But I think we need to make laws that are more general than so limited.
Did everybody get to express their questions, concerns about affordable housing and feel that you know what the next steps are, which I guess is really just you, Stuart? Thanks.
That's me.
So do we have a timeline on what's a reasonable timeline to be able to incorporate some of these to?
Thank you.
No, that's why I asked for something reasonable. It's also, we're going into the summer. I know what our August schedule looks like more or less.
Our first August
We have a
work
legislative
session
session.
is the 22nd. I know you'll have two presentations that
We do. We
night.
have a couple of big ones.
And then we have a fairly busy August 29th as well. So,
Getting out
We
there.
have one big one on August 29th, so I would say tentatively,
if you wanna-
if we can have a draft
want
for
to look
August
for the
29th, I
29th,
think
then
that's
then
reasonable.
that's fine. 'Cause that would also give me some time to at least talk to Tracy, not scare her off so that she doesn't do that. But I think August 29th will be fine.
That's the
Okay.
ETPA vacancy study, right? August 29th.
Correct.
Yes.
Can we, where is that scheduled as far as a venue?
I hadn't actually,
You know what? If we could ask the library, because we never asked them about a fifth Wednesday, I don't imagine. We may never have asked them about August at
Or it
that
just kind of came
point.
to me. It just,
Yeah, if not, then the community center would be an alternative.
Yeah, that's good too.
All right. Can we take a 5-minute break? Because I think we're gonna.
Sure.
Oh, just broke my pen. Thank you.
Stuart, it's a busy night for you.
Oh,
We're going to talk about, get an update on the proposed legislation, local laws 4 through 9. Looking at the audience, we do have some folks here observing the meeting tonight, and so we're going to mix the order up a little bit, predicting what people might be most interested in. We'll go local law 4 regarding feral cats, and then we'll skip down to local law 9 regarding dog tethering. Although everyone is welcome to stay if they want to hear about all the rest. Stuart Kahan, thank you for bringing these all together for us to discuss. On one occasion, we have discussed all of them at a variety of occasions, and I think they're in different states of development. And I'm hoping that by the end of tonight, we have a better sense of what is the next step for
Sure.
each of them, and maybe some idea of a timeline. I think some of them are probably pretty well advanced.
Right.
So look forward to being able to see them move.
Does anyone else on the board need a packet of or do they have their own stuff already?
well, I was about to look at my iPhone, but if you brought a
Maybe I should.
packet and you've
Already
already, if
printed.
you've already killed the tree, I'll take the printed rather than keep
Yes.
scrolling through my
I,
iPhone.
I killed it already.
Killed? Okay.
Is it,
then.
is it,
Killed his own tree.
You don't have to get
Oh,
up.
okay.
I can use the exercise.
I was going to print them myself, and then I realized they would probably have done a nice job.
Okay.
Thank you, sir.
Everybody. Local Law 4 is something we had discussed previously, and that relates to a revision to Chapter 75 dealing with, specifically with feral cats. After this local law was proposed and discussed by the board, I had received some comments from the Cat Protection Council of Westchester, who have been very helpful, frankly, throughout all of this. Trustee Codman and I attended a meeting with various representatives who are here tonight. I thank them. As a result of that meeting, the folks from the CPCW were good enough to present 2 proposals for us, which I've sent to you folks a while back. One was for conducting the Trap, Neuter, Return, TNR program for the Village of Ossining, and the other was a proposal which related to a community cat trap and removal proposal, and that specifically related to the colonies located at Monitor Hose on Central Avenue and the DPW property on Water Street. Let me first deal with the proposed local law. The folks at the CPCW had a number of concerns with regard to the proposed local law, which, as I had mentioned last time, was based in significant part upon an ordinance that is currently in effect in Maplewood, New Jersey. CPCW's issues, which I had, I think I'd sent you copies of those emails, dealt with concerns that the law as promulgated would in fact dissuade folks from wanting to act as caregivers and might actually create potential legal situations for the caregivers. There was a concern they might be running afoul of certain sections of the Agriculture and Markets Law with regard to abandoning of animals. My view is different than that, but let me just proceed from where we are. The board may have noted that there was a recent article in the Journal News that both the town of Haverstraw and the village of West Haverstraw recently passed ordinances relating to feral cats. And those ordinances are fairly simple and straightforward, and essentially what they provide, if I can find it here, they define feral cats as one of the groups of essentially community cats, and they have various definitions, but essentially what it is just a restatement of the trap, neuter, vaccinate, and return policy. And they go through what that is, and the last section of both ordinances is that the village officials will work with the animal control officer, in this case of the town of Haverstraw, to implement and administer this chapter in consultation with community cat welfare experts and animal welfare agencies, such as the folks from the CPCW. One of the issues that the CPCW brought up at our meeting was that the SPCA, which currently handles the spay and neutering procedures with regard to cats that are trapped in the village, only performs those procedures one day a week, which is Monday. That creates a number of difficulties because you have the weekend, and if you have a large number of cats, the SPCA can only handle a certain number. There was some discussion about mobile units that might be able to be of some assistance to deal with the larger number of cats that are there. So that's one thing that we had talked about. But in terms of the local law itself, I've had some further discussions with Deborah Hamilton, who has sort of acted as, let's call it best ways, a mediator between both sides, and she's been very, very helpful. I spoke to her, in fact, earlier this week. And what I'm looking at doing is revising the local law to be more in line with what now exists essentially, as I said, in Haverstraw and in the town over there. And it would utilize the services, I think would be important, of the Cat Protection Council to assist the village with regard to the TNR program. That would be in conjunction with the animal control officer and with the police department from that end. A huge part of this is education. A massive part of this is education. One of the things that was made very clear, and as I said, they provided us with 2 proposals. The proposal with regard to the trap and remove, which, as I said, would be to remove those cats, the likelihood of success is thin and none, because even if the cats are removed, other cats will come in. And beyond that, it's a fairly expensive procedure. The sanctuary that is willing to take those cats, it's $350 a cat. The sanctuary is in Maryland, so there would be transportation costs. There would be costs of caring for the cats until you get them down there. You can only have the cats, I believe, caged for a fairly short period of time. So you've got to essentially catch the cat and then go down to Maryland, turn back, and come back. So it's a difficult situation. And as I said, as they pointed out in their proposal, one of the most, biggest problems with it is at the end of the day, you may have moved those cats, but you have other cats essentially coming back. So I think it's more important to look at the proposal that they have presented, the CPCW, with regard to assisting with the TNR program. Educating the folks, getting more people involved in it, calling up, if someone knows that they have a cat, they see it's a cat, they can call the folks at the CPCW, they can trap the cat, they can get the cat brought over, they can get it, neutered, they can get it vaccinated, and they can then get it returned to the particular location. I think that, is really where we are, and again, that's what you see in the village of Haverstraw, and you see in the town as well, over there. Their policy, if I can just say a few things, it's that they would provide or coordinate services for the feral cats in the village. They'll train and monitor new volunteers. They'll educate the colony caregivers, and they'll assist the village in coordinating various things. They'll assist the police department. And I think working with that organization would be a big help. It's a significant problem. We get a lot of calls about this. And I think the more cats you can catch, the more cats you can then neuter and vaccinate. Basically, you are then dealing with you're dealing with the colonies and the cats that are there. As I said, I think the initial go through of this law, which I said was based upon what was done in Maplewood, has a number of things in it which you do see in Haverstraw. I don't want to say that they're not there, but I did take to heart a number of the concerns that the CPCW folks had. What I don't want to have is people not doing the trapping and neutering. I think that was the greatest concern that I got, was that effectively if we instituted Maplewood, what we might find out is that fewer people would be doing it. And then we're in a bigger jam than we are now. So my thought is that if we went with something similar to what is with our friends across the river, and then had a separate policy that would specifically, name CPCW, because I wouldn't name CPCW in the actual code, because if for some reason CPCW fails to exist for some reason, we got to amend the statute. But if we had some sort of policy which identifies that this is the agency that we're to work with to basically do this, I think that provides, the best means. I attended briefly, they had a session over at the community center with, I think, a veterinarian from Mercy College, if I'm not mistaken, who was very helpful. And that, I think, is probably the best way to do it. I know that, Annie Rodriguez and I have, we've extended our agreement with Annie for another 3 months so that we can hopefully hammer something out. I think that this is the best way to go, and using the Haverstraw ordinance is essentially the template. And if you read the article, both mayors there were, the mayor and the supervisor, were very, very pleased with what it's done. I think the town did it first, and then the village followed, suit soon thereafter. My thought is to have something which is modeled on that for this board to look at. I would also, get the input from the folks at the CPCW, put together a policy for that as well, and obviously involve the chief so that he knows what it comes from his end. And then we can, basically go from there so that we have a specific policy that relates to these cats. So that's my hope.
You were at the meeting, John. Do you want to?
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, as much as I, would like to see, the cats removed from public property, as quickly as possible. Longer term, it's just, it's just not going to work. The behavior of the animals just wouldn't allow that. You just create a vacuum. So it was a good meeting, and it was very, very informative. I continue to learn more about this. I think that, the way we are currently, I don't think we have the level of attention that the problem requires. And I think we have a group of volunteers that are willing to step in and are very passionate about doing this. And I like the local law. Obviously, we can't name a specific group, but it creates a framework within which we would engage with somebody to conduct the program, to do the trapping, to do all the work. I think the council also has access to other services that'll allow us to be able to trap more cats, get more neutered. I mean, the whole point, or spayed. I mean, the point is we don't want them to continue to reproduce, and the faster that we can capture the cats, and some of them are so young that you might take them to the SPCA and they might be able to be given away, So, I was very encouraged by the meeting, and I certainly support the legislation, and I would support their activity. I think we need to. We need to move this along. We need to get this formalized. We need to get the agreement formalized, and we need to create the connection with the police chief and also with animal control, so everybody's kind of knows what everybody's doing and what's going on. So it would be my recommendation that we move forward with that and engage in the negotiation for the Cat Protection Council to take care of the program.
I just want to clarify, Stuart. You talked about the original draft being borrowed from Maplewood and incorporating instead some of the provisions from Havistraw. This does not yet have the Havistraw provisions, is that
No,
correct?
I have not put the
Okay,
Havistraw
I just want to make
provisions.
sure,
That's-
as we're looking through this,
You are
that-
correct. This is
that
this is the original one that we talked
can
about.
anticipate that there will be a revised
Yes,
proposed local law
correct.
for us to more specifically
There will be.
comment on? Okay. Others with questions and comments about the feral cat proposed law? Okay. Yes, please.
So I read this. It's all underlined, so it's all brand new, right? Just, so it's section 75. What's 75? Like, what is?
Chapter 75 is animals.
So it's all about,
It's
within the animal
within our code. That's
section.
the
Okay.
animals.
So I get all of this, which I think is great. We talked about having responsible parties, about people who care about the animals, taking care of them, educating, that's on page 2. How does this provide for the people who are taking care of feral cats who are not part of this, which exists today, right? There are people that are feeding 2 or 3, they're not a part of this group, they may never want to be a part. How can we manage that, or do you not see a way to manage that? I mean, this is definitely a move forward, but there are people that have cats, they're not registered, they're not a part of this organization. As you said, the organization might take on a different shape and form in a year or 2. We don't know, nobody knows, right?
Right, and there's 2 aspects to it. One is the TNR, which I think we know has to be done. We do have folks who simply act as caregivers, but don't report that they are caring for cats. That's a problem. And that's an education, and, you want to be able to get the folks from the CPCW who can educate these folks. Cats will come back, but at least get them vaccinated and get them neutered or get them spayed. If a person is simply going to go out and find some cats and feed some cats, there is very little we can do. I mean, particularly if it's on private property. I mean.
I get that. So this doesn't solve for that, but it
No.
solves for the other 80%.
Correct.
So it's just a question, because this really takes it far. I mean, I didn't even know what a feral cat was till, a year ago. So we've all been educated ourselves. The other question is, so you're tagging the shelter with a stick or something, right?
Yeah, now I should point out, that's what's in the ordinance there.
Yeah, but?
It will be changed because the Havistraw ordinance is not as descriptive as that. There were some issues that the CPCW folks raised with necessarily tagging particular places, and I can go into some detail because they had a number of comments with regard to the Maplewood ordinance, which is essentially what this is based on. So
So you're going to create a different draft and include.
there'll be another
whatever-
draft that I will circulate to all you
So,
folks. That's
so
correct.
my interest is, I see a shelter, I'm an innocent bystander, I love animals, and I see it, and I see cats, and I think, oh, they must be hungry. What I've learned about feral cats, you're not supposed to overfeed them. So what is the interaction between people walking on and feeding and the organization that's responsible for all this? They can't know what they don't know. They're not there and somebody's feeding. Like,
Correct.
who's responsible?
Well, the bottom line is that, as you said, it's only what these folks know, it's only what's reported to them or reported to our animal control officer.
So still, that's still out there, okay.
It's that issue's gonna be there.
All right.
Well, no one's gonna walk by a shelter because they only exist currently where they do, right? So, I mean, unless you see a cat and you just pass by it, but that necessarily
There
wouldn't
may be
happen, right?
well,
Oh,
you know,
no, there are others.
Again, part of it,
Non-affiliated ones, right?
part of this was directed
Point.
at shelters on village property. There certainly may be shelters on private property
Yeah.
that we don't,
Well,
that's just not.
People shouldn't be
with us.
walking on that. in
But, in terms
general
of
law,
on
you
the,
know.
on
Wasn't
public,
my question.
private, we know where those are.
Yeah.
And, we've been working to make sure that those are properly maintained, which they have been, so that keeps up. But you're right, if someone wants to come over and drop off food,
Okay.
now, there are other ordinances that get involved with that, which become, the littering or things like that, that get, if someone does that and it's caught, they could get written up, under chapter 220.
So does it make sense that this organization, I think you're calling a sponsor organization?
There it's called.
If they see, like, in a public space, some feral cats that they're not aware of, should they be reporting it somewhere, or should they make it their own? I mean, there are people feeding cats
Right, but
in
if
our
they-
parks and in all of other places right
One of
now.
the things to be worked out with the CPCW is if they were, for example, to see a cat, and it's clearly, it's not a house cat, and
Okay.
it's not, but it's a feral cat, and it's not ear-tipped, which is
Right,
the key.
got it.
Which is the key.
Yep.
That cat would be subject to being trapped, and if it's
Okay.
trapped, it could be taken, and then it would be returned to where it was essentially found from. And it would go back to that, that particular, that particular location, but at least then it would not be in a position where there would be other cats.
And my last question, just about enforcement. So the first offense, dollars, and the second, where'd you get that? Is it just something we've discussed? I just didn't know where it came from.
That's actually I believe that's from the Maplewood, so I may have
Okay.
taken those numbers
So
from
you've
there.
taken it from another.
I think I took that from there.
All right, well,
Mr. Ura, did you have a comment or question on that?
No, but thank you.
I understood that the conclusion was, and I have every reason to believe it's been well thought out. I know that a lot of effort has gone into working with a lot of advocates. Thank you for everybody who's been helpful with this, and everyone from village staff who has taken the time and patience to learn something that most of us knew very little about a year ago. But there are a couple of locations where there are currently cat colonies being managed, and it had been hoped that they would be moved to another location or no longer maintained in that location. We've come to realize that there really are not good options for moving them that would work. So then, what is the plan? That
Well, my
they will
gr-
continue to live happily in shelters on public property indefinitely, and will more be welcomed in the future?
The answer to the latter is no. The issue with the public-private, I'm more concerned, to be honest, with the Water Street property, because that is potentially a property that's developable by the village. And, I don't know if someone wants to come and, buy it and basically have a colony of feral cats there. That's one of the reasons that we asked the CPCW to at least provide a proposal for removing the cats. And when we had the folks here from the Humane Society in the past, there was a significant discussion as to the ability essentially to move the colony even a short distance. Here you'd be moving the cats, and the concern is and they've explained it better, but that if you basically take the cats away, other cats will come in. Now, that does not mean that an effort should not be made at some point to try to, reduce that population by moving them. But I think in the immediate time that we are now, the greater concern has to be on trying to trap, neuter, and release as many cats as we can. I think that's really where the effort has to be placed, because the more we can do there, I think over time, we have the better results.
And with the education, which you said is a very large part
Right.
of this initiative, I assume that's not just education for people who want to be part of this volunteer organization, but also for the community at large, because if our focus is on trap, neuter, return, but there's a constant flow of more abandoned cats, then we're just going to keep trap, neutering, and returning, and then having more cats to trap, neuter, and return, and there's never going to be a depletion. There's just going to be a continued escalation. So that is part of the education.
It's
It's
part-
for
the
the
whole thing.
broader community.
It's not just
for
the
what
folks,
your
it's everyone.
responsibility is for caring for cats, and when you should and shouldn't bring a cat into your home, and if the cat's no longer welcome in your home, then how it should be cared
Right.
for, or not left. Okay.
All of that.
Okay. Thanks. Local law 9. Yeah, we're skipping to 9 because
Yeah, no, I
there's some
heard
folks in the room.
Okay. Local Law 9.
9, then 6 through 8.
This is another revision to Chapter 75, which is the animal chapter of the village. Local Law 9 relates, and this is to add an Article 5, which relates to tethering. Most of what we have here, it follows ordinances that are from Ulster County, Suffolk County, town of Riverhead, and I think the town of Hempstead as well. Syracuse recently passed an ordinance. They did it after Onondaga County did not pass it. And what happened then is one of the counselors in Syracuse proposed it herself, and so the city passed it. So while it's citywide, it's not countywide up there. There was an issue. It wasn't exactly clear why it did not get through the county legislature. It did get through the city council unanimously. But what this basically does is it lists a series of prohibited acts in terms of what cannot be done with regard to with dogs. It defines a responsible party as anyone who either owns, harbors, or has custody or control of a dog. And tethering is defined as the restraining a dog by attaching it to any object or structure, including, without limitation, house, tree, fence, post, garage, or shed, by any means, including, without limitation, chain, rope, cord, leash, or running line. And it does not include using a leash to walk a dog. If some of you recall, at an earlier session where we were talking about dog tethering, I did give some description of Section 353B of the New York State Agriculture and Markets Law. That deals with requirements for shelter for certain dogs, and it does have the language that the consideration of the breed is something to be taken into account when considering shelter. But this particular ordinance has that it will be unlawful for any party to tether, leash, fasten, secure, restrain, chain, or tie a dog to any stationary object outdoors, or cause the dog to be restrained in a manner that endangers the dog's health, safety, or well-being, restricts the dog's access to suitable and sufficient food and water, does not provide the dog with shelter appropriate to its breed, physical condition, and climate pursuant to 353B, and unreasonably limits the movement of the dog because the tether is too short for the dog to move around. It then goes into if you're going to let the dog be outside and you're involved with having it to be tethered, it talks about the type of tether that can be used. It gets fairly specific in terms of that the links cannot be more than a 1/4 inch thick, which is what is seen in, I believe, Ulster, and it's seen in certainly in Suffolk County and Riverhead. It has a weight restriction with regard to the tether. It has a length restriction. Importantly, that the length cannot be long enough to allow the dog to go outside the responsible party's property. It can't be long enough so that the tether would become entangled. It cannot be long enough so to allow the restrained dog to move over an object or edge that could strangle the dog. Also, two dogs cannot be tethered at the same time to the same tether because you could have issues there. Further, if the dog is less than 6 months of age, sick or injured, or a nursing mother whose offspring are present, those dogs may not be tethered. With regard to timing of being tethered, the provision here is that a dog can be tethered for a maximum of 12 hours in any 24-hour period, except that a dog may not be tethered outside when the National Weather Service has issued a weather alert. And a weather alert is defined here as a warning issued by the National Weather Service for a heat advisory, frigid weather, snow, ice, tornadoes, tropical storm, high winds, or thunderstorms. The 12 hours is taken from the Ulster County ordinance. The ordinances out in Suffolk County, Town of Hempstead, Town of Riverhead, are 2 hours in any 24-hour period. Port Chester is, I think, about the same, if I'm not mistaken. But I figured 12 hours because if in Ulster County, which in fact is colder than where we are, they viewed that as acceptable there. I thought we could put that in here, but it's obviously subject to discussion.
Can I ask you about, so the weather alert, those are for humans, right? So heat and cold is designed on human conditions when we
Correct.
get the national weather. So my neighbor who breeds animals, not here in Ossining, elsewhere, told me that actually there are certain dogs that absolutely love being in the snow. And there are a number of breeds that actually, she has to air condition her house in the summer like crazy because they go nuts unless it's freezing in the house. So I'm not sure that this is, this is so detailed, but sometimes putting this much detail, and because somebody else did it, a bunch of people like us sat around and did this somewhere else, doesn't mean we have an expertise. So the weather reports don't make sense to me because snow for some of these dogs are actually like really enjoyable.
Which is one of the reasons why I did not include what you see in a lot of these places, that if the temperature is under 32 or greater than 90, the dog must be inside.
Right, but,
That you see, that's actually far more common,
okay.
which you tend to see that range. But there are locations, South Fallsburg up in Sullivan County, they have a restriction, and I remember theirs is 46. Basically, the dog can be off the tether for 2 hours in any 48-hour period. It means essentially the dog can be tethered for 46 hours. And there's no weather restriction. I mean, just the dog can be tethered. So as I said, I left the temperature part out. I was a little leery of the weather alert because, again, you know, as you said, a frigid weather, there may be dogs that just are thrilled about it. But that's, again, what you see that I did not include, that's why I did not include the temperature range, but again, there are other ordinances where, in fact, there's just a time restriction. There is no restriction in terms of weather. Basically, because, as I said, under 353B, the shelter has to be provided that's consistent with the dog's breed. Which is what is there. The ordinance also would provide that the tethered dogs must be free of cruel or inhumane tethering at any time, or cruel conditions or inhumane tethering, which would be defined as exposure to animal waste, garbage, noxious odors, or objects that could injure or kill the dog, exposure to taunting, prodding, provoking, hitting, or harassing the dog, or exposing the dog to dangerous conditions, including potential attacks by other animals. And then there are the enforcement penalties here, which are taken in large part, I believe, from Suffolk County. I would just have to go back and make for sure. Basically, the first time is a warning, would not necessarily incur a fine, but then it would be a fine of no more than $250 with an educational component if so directed by the court. Second time, if it's within 12 months, would be a fine of no more than $500 or 50 hours of community service, plus a reimbursement of costs, investigative costs. If there's a third violation within 12 months, then it would be a fine of no more than $1,000 and or $100 of community service, plus, if so directed by the court, surrender of the dog. Under state law, if the dog is in fact taken away, you have to essentially pay the cost before you can get the dog back, and you have to show that you have made adequate changes. So that's the proposal here. It also provides, as we've done in some other areas of the law, that violations, and this is from, again, the laws on, this is, I think, from Hempstead, violations of the article may be supported by evidence including but not limited to timestamp photographs, videos, records of complaints, and sworn witness statements. So it doesn't necessarily require just that the police actually see it, but someone can actually provide them with stamped information or photographs or affidavits that this is what they observed as a basis for proceeding with that complaint. And that's the proposed local law 9.
Thank you. Syracuse is a very recently passed law, and I know
Very
that was
recent.
one of the ones that you looked at,
I
but
was unable to actually access it. They do have the temperature restriction, Syracuse, so it's under 32 or greater than 90.
now, are there other laws that have been in place for a period of time that we have any sort of track record on how they're going?
I'd have to check with the ordinances. I mean,
Portchester, right?
Portchester for about 3 years, I think. Ulster has been longer. The ones on Long Island are since like the early 2000s, around there. So those have been around for a bit. Portchester's a little bit more recent than that. Portchester's also the only one I mentioned before where it deals with tethering of any animal.
Yeah,
not
and they
just,
go into ferrets and
just,
everything.
just
What other animal do you,
But,
I actually saw somebody walking a ferret on a leash.
ferret? Oh,
so there are a couple of places that have it. I've not spoken with, my counterparts in those locations as to how it's been working, but that's, but it comes up in a number of other places. I said up in South Fallsburg, they simply have a time restriction. They have nothing else. They just say dog has to be off for a particular period of time. One of the things that Portchester has that no other ordinance has is that if the dog is tethered, the owner or responsible party must be in the house at that time. That is not found in any other ordinance. And I did not include that in this proposed local law.
I know that New York State had a proposed local law, and then we looked into it, and it's not going anywhere, at least not at this point in New York State. Now, I know that the county was looking at a county version. Do you have
yeah,
any?
did you mention that
You know,
last
from your
time?
day job, what might be going on with that?
My understanding is that it's in the very preliminary beginning stages of it. The efforts being led by legislator Margaret Kunzio and legislator Virginia Perez. They are pretty big animal advocates for the county, so let's stay tuned on how that goes.
If the county passes, then it overrides our local village or not? Not that I object one way or the other, because I don't know what they're working on, but just asking the question,
I
that's
don't
all.
think, it's interesting, I don't think that's necessarily the case, because Suffolk County has one, as does the town of Riverhead.
Oh.
And so I think, so it may be that I think that if the town has it out there, their ordinance governs in the town, but for other locations within the county, so in other words, if Portchester has an ordinance, I don't believe the county's ordinance would supersede Portchester's. But
Home rule, that's a home rule
but
then.
since Mamaroneck, for example, does not have one, the county, would
Oh,
cover
okay.
what goes on.
All right.
I think sometimes they can draft it in a particular way, too, whether or not it supersedes.
Whatever they
Well,
want.
it's just, I'm just curious
I
about,
hate to say that, but
Because with
Okay.
the state, it's just, if we're stricter, we can be stricter, and they're sort of the minimum.
so this
but-
is the most amount of paper. Actually, second most.
Well, thank you very much, because this has been a long journey to come up with what seems like it might be, it might have incorporated a lot of the concerns that have been raised, while still being something that well-intended, thoughtful, careful dog owners wouldn't be infringed upon. And I think, as in the case of, this is one of those laws that it's there and available as needed when something is reported. It gives something for the enforcement officers, in this case, usually the police or animal control, to be able to have as their guidelines for when there's been a violation. Nobody's going to be walking the streets looking for opportunities to enforce this, but when they're brought to the attention, then there's something to enforce. Are there other questions and concerns? How do people feel about what Stuart's brought to us?
I like it.
I'm okay with it.
I have one more question. I'm sorry. It's interesting to me. Commercial property tethering, are there any issues with people who own commercial properties? And because when I grew up, like I know we don't have junkyards per se of that size, but they used to have what, am I saying something funny?
Well, I'm just envisioning,
We thought it was funny.
yeah.
Well, I lived in Queens,
I
they have
mean,
junkyards and they
what
have the
was the Stephen
dogs
King
there
movie
for a
with the-
purpose.
with
Guard
the-
dog,
what is
very
it?
kind of, yeah.
No, not Cujo. No, I wasn't thinking that. I was
Oh,
thinking
I
of the
hate
sweet,
those
the
movies.
sweet.
No, I
the
just don't
sweet
know.
poor boys
I
in
mean, there
the-
might be, I don't know, there might be a fenced-in commercial property, and again, to the mayor's point, that we're not trying to hinder the rights
Right.
of people who live in this community who happen to love and care for their dogs in the best way that they feel is a responsible way. We're trying to do something that's balanced. So, does it affect commercial? It doesn't, I just don't know how that plays in.
It's actually silent on that because essentially it refers to a responsible party. So that a party is not permitted to do certain things with a dog in terms of tethering. So regardless of where the dog
I would
is.
interpret it as then it's for everything.
Yes, it would be
everybody.
anywhere
Bring your
within the
dog to
village.
work, then you still have to treat it the same way.
I was thinking more of commercial properties overnight and stuff like
Yep.
that. Okey dokey. Anybody else?
Great, so then what would be the next step for local law 9?
Next step would be to call for a public hearing.
Are we ready to call for a public hearing on August 1st?
We could have a resolution to call, well, we could put the resolution on next week to call for the public hearing, and then the public hearing would have to be in September, right? Because, oh no, could we do it on the 15th?
It could be, I won't be there, you would be presiding at that meeting, John, I know that I will not be.
We have to do like a 30-day public hearing, or
2
is
weeks.
that
No,
what we
you
normally
just need to
do?
give 2
10
weeks'
days,
notice.
2 weeks' notice.
14,
So
15
if we
days.
did
No,
it
the
on
notice, but how long do we keep it? Oh, we'll decide another time.
August weekend.
Yeah, so we could have the hearing, we could have the public hearing on the 15th.
Okay.
So, okay, I'll do that.
Good. Sir. Back to number 5. Thanks.
Alrighty, I'm on 5.
All right, building code
Okay.
revisions.
Thank you, everybody. Local Law 5. This is one we had a fairly lengthy discussion on before. I have tried to answer many of the questions that were asked. Went over the video. I did include at Trustee Levin's suggestion and request a legislative purpose at the very beginning, so that this is as to the first dealing with commercial occupancy. At the mayor's request in the second section, 16248, rather than they must have plans, it will now say that may be required, or, to make it not mandatory depending on the circumstance. And as I look through here, I'm just looking at where I made other changes. There are some stylistic changes where I've added the title of Assistant Building Inspector to some of these to give them the authority, when and if we have an Assistant Building Inspector. So we can at least do that. And as I move on here, let me just see. What I've done, initially I had put in an article dealing with actual maintenance within some of these vacant buildings. I've actually combined that all into what would be Article 7. So, for example, it now will provide that any person who owns or has charge of or control of any building which has been vacant for over 60 days shall remove all combustible waste and refuse therefrom, and lock, barricade, guard continuously, or otherwise secure the doors and all windows. It will require that all sprinklers, standpipes, fire alarm systems, and component parts be maintained in an operating condition. It requires that windows be repaired if, in fact, windows have become broken. We go into that. There's also a provision now that, and this was taken from, I apologize, I forget exactly which ordinance I was looking at, but except for one locked exterior door, all openings shall be boarded up. There was some question, I know, last time we were here as to what covering could be on the outside of the building. And I was asked to look at White Plains and Peekskill and Beacon for, what they allow. White Plains, unfortunately, does not have as easy access to their code, but I was able to look at both Beacon and the other location I just forgot. Basically, what I've put in here, and this is in subsection J, and what it comes down to is that where the aforementioned code enforcement personnel, and that would be the Director of Code Enforcement, Building Inspector, Assistant Building Inspector, or Code Enforcement Officer, do not deem it necessary to board up windows or other openings in vacant buildings. Such buildings shall maintain doors and glass windows in good condition, appropriate to the architecture of the building, and shall provide appropriate window dressings where code enforcement personnel deem it necessary to shield the public's view into the vacant building. Appropriate window dressings shall not include newspaper, white window paint, or other similar means of concealing views into the vacant building. Basically, you can't just paint over the windows. And it's in the next subparagraph, if you have to put up plywood or any press board to cover areas, it's got to be painted the color of the building. So it's not just going to be sort of, you're going to put that stuff up. And it's got to be put up in like a professional manner. You can't just put it up on an angle. You got to put it up as if you're actually, trying to make your building look right.
Neat and workmanlike.
Neat and workmanlike, as it says there. That's actually from Beacon, has that in there.
I like subsection J. I think it actually encourages some of the, what we were talking about, making hard.
Yeah, and, basically, if code enforcement folks think it's fine, there's not an issue with it.
So with respect to J.
Yeah.
And some of these others, if they're not compliant, what penalties apply to them if they're instructed to do things, and they don't do them, then what happens?
Well, violation shall be, basically, it's fines pursuant to Article 3. The village gets a judgment. Let me just see what I've got here. If the village gets a judgment, it could simply enforce the judgment in the same manner as it would enforce against village taxes. There is no provision under this article at this point for the village to come in. I would have to double check for the village itself to come in and actually make those repairs if necessary.
Because one of the things is, I don't want to be too onerous here, but, sometimes people, if they don't feel as though there's, if there's not going to be a consequence to being compliant, that.
Well, I think what we can do, because I have it, I believe, later in here, is that if in fact the repairs are not made, then be it the DPW can make those repairs. They can then essentially charge back, and it can be leaned as taxes against that particular individual.
Is a window dressing deemed a repair?
Well, I don't know if a window dressing is deemed a repair.
Like, what if they don't want to follow our rules with how we are encouraging them to conceal their windows based off of the discretion of our officers?
Village Code, Chapter 1, Article 3.
If the code enforcement officer where the code enforcement personnel do not deem it necessary to board up the windows, but what you're saying is what happens if the person says, I'm just.
Yeah, so if Crusoe's Deli chooses to continue to have a room divider and posters and miscellaneous paperwares covering their windows, that's kind of, can we, if it's not included now, is there a way that we could also have a fine structure for that?
Well, this has a penalty provision here. So we do have it that if they, for example, if they don't remove signs and associated hardware, that's a violation under the code. And they could be fined for that. Remember, one of the problems with, and I should point this out, Trustee Codman, with going in and going in, if we go into the building, technically we're going to a building where we don't own.
We're trespassing.
Difficulty. So it's one thing to perhaps go out and secure the building, be it you put up plywood or presswood and you charge that back. I'd be far more concerned about actually physically entering the building to make any repairs.
It could be right on the sidewalk. I mean, we already regulate how much signage can cover a window,
Right.
So
But what I'm saying is, we do that.
we shouldn't break in. I agree.
We're not going to go into the building, but if in fact in this case, they didn't remove the signs there would be a violation. If it's deemed that they haven't kept the storefront in good repair, that would be a violation. And, you know, you could, now, what it can be, you know, again, these are all on the property, which is one of the reasons that we don't generally like to send our people onto someone else's property to make those repairs. So it's just essentially a fine. There are certain times where we will go onto property and we will, you know, charge back. But, you know, as I said, I'd rather not have the person go in, particularly buildings locked. I'm not, you know, I'm not breaking a lock to get into someone's building.
When we've gone in, it's usually because there's like overgrowth of bushes or
Right,
something that we're
that's
talking about.
correct.
It's not going inside a structure.
something with the
This is a whole
exterior-
nother level. I think the U.S. Constitution has
exterior
something to
property.
say about that too,
So
so
that's why, you know, I think
this probably doesn't.
there's a limit to, you know, what we would want to do in that circumstance.
Stuart,
Yeah.
it says, you know, 62-58 penalties for offenses, violation of any section of this article should be treated pursuant to Village Code, Chapter 1, Article 3.
Right.
So I guess, I guess I want to know what those penalties are. or-
It's, I forget, it's fairly low. It's like, I think $150, $250. It's an appearance ticket, and the person would show
Oh,
up
so-
on our code enforcement calendar.
Oh, so is it an OTR, or is it a violation ticket with a
It's under 162, so it would be an OTR. We would start it as an OTR. They'd have 30 days to make the, actually, since it's a village ordinance, we could give them less than 30 days. If there's a violation of the state code, we'd have to give them 30 days. So we can give them less than 30 days to actually make the repair, and if they don't, we issue an appearance ticket.
All right, and so that would include the request for them to cover the windows properly
Yes.
and that sort of thing?
Yeah.
Okay, all right.
Or uncover the windows improperly.
Well,
Right.
whatever, I mean, you know.
I know, we're all thinking of one particular
also-
example.
it's also true.
Trustee Basemore.
Okay,
Oh,
just
yeah.
proceeding.
So I know
Go ahead,
section
I'm sorry.
section J, again, I guess kind of refers to our art in the window conversation. Knowing that it can't be, I imagine you wouldn't want to be so particular in this section. This question's for Debbie. Will your code enforcement, and I guess in your own procedures, will we actually be saying that art is acceptable window dressing?
You mean like a picture?
Yeah. Yeah, like art. Yeah. Okay, I'm just.
I will
That
say,
was great.
I'm not sure what you meant by art. I'm
I
sorry,
know
I
where
I
he's
brought
going
up
with
last
this.
time that art is in the eye of the beholder, and
Well,
one
that's
person's
true.
art is another person's not so artsy
Yeah.
poster.
So, you know, we don't want these buildings to look vacant.
Mm-hmm.
So if there is an opportunity, let's say, for a property owner as vacant property to make an agreement with a nonprofit to
Mm-hmm.
come in and put up some literature about that nonprofit, makes the storefront look busy,
Mm-hmm.
and it has an opportunity to advance maybe a nonprofit.
Mm-hmm.
I know you're talking about like hanging a picture.
Or whatever. It's just.
but,
Or
I mean,
even-
there's
even if-
creative
even
ways
if
of
they-
putting things in your windows.
Even if the Girl Scouts come, hey, can we paint your entire window for
Right.
a canvas for
Yeah.
or whatever month? You know, just if
Right.
they, you know, I just want those options to be there.
Yeah.
Although we can do it
From-
like
from
this, for
procedurals.
years.
Right.
well,
you know.
and there are,
Say, like,
You know, I
don't even do
think we
that.
want it to look like there's something going on there, even if there isn't, because it does attract people to look at the building, and then, you know, there's a sign that says it's for sale, or for rent, or lease, or, you know, or whatever, but
Okay.
John, do you think that the Austining Arts Project might be interested in looking at how they might be able to facilitate relationships with vacant building property owners and local artists?
It's been discussed
That's
in
fun.
our meetings, so, yeah, we could certainly consider that or coordinate that if you feel like you have a candidate to.
Might promote local artists or local
Right.
community
Yeah,
organizations,
exactly.
or there's a
Right.
lot of
Yeah.
opportunities,
Absolutely.
yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, I wouldn't consider like a poster at art,
Right, which is why it's so vague here,
Yeah.
but yeah.
you know.
Yeah, I just want to make sure this
Well, it
is,
could be a
it's
poster
broad
or a piece
enough
of art.
from your guys to understand. Hey, this
Right. So
might
once
work.
the board has decided exactly what you want, we'll set policy and procedures and educate them as to what is acceptable and not acceptable.
And this code, Stuart, as you're hearing all of our potential ideas for how we might, the code as drawn up here would allow for the kind of flexibility of the
Yes.
ideas that we're sharing now.
Yes, all this code basically says is what you couldn't do. You couldn't use newspapers, you couldn't use white paint.
Right.
You know, or things like that, but otherwise, open.
Unless the Girl Scouts are painting snow. I know, it was a good example.
We've also, and so that article is basically also, that's your vacant building registry. It has your fees for the vacant building registry. Trustee Levin last time had asked a question as to what actually is a vacant building. And I had sent the board earlier today an email which gave the definition from a different, another jurisdiction in which, and I don't have the email here, where it basically pointed out that if it's a multifamily building, if it's a two-family, multifamily, or mixed use, and one of the units is occupied, it is not considered vacant. Now, I didn't put that in here, but I did, as we go further, there is a definition of vacant here, which is different than the last definition. In the earlier iteration, the vacancy was like this long definition. But now it's basically any building structure or portion thereof designed or used for residential or commercial purposes which has been unoccupied or unused for a period of 60 days or longer. Additionally, it will include any building structure or portion thereof that is unoccupied as determined by the appropriate village, county, or state agency. That latter language is because there are provisions for buildings to be considered as abandoned under state law, and if the village makes that determination, that part of the building would be considered abandoned, even if it's not within the 60-day time frame. So, but I've just kept it as building structure or portion thereof, the feeling being that if it is particularly a mixed use, even if there are apartments upstairs, if the commercial downstairs is vacant, that needs to be covered by the registry. So that's why that's there. Under, which would be Article 9, which is on outdoor signs, I've now included a definition of what is an abandoned sign. Since I titled the section Abandoned Signs, I thought that might be helpful to say what they actually are. And it has an abandoned sign is any sign which advertises, identifies, or pertains to an activity no longer in existence for at least 60 days. The provision does not apply to seasonal activities during regular periods in which the activity is closed. So at least covers that. And that then provides that if the sign has been abandoned, the owner of the sign or the owner of the building or premises in the sign owner's absence shall be required to remove the sign. And Trustee Cobham, this is one of the sections where it provides that if the sign is not removed, the DPW can remove it and can then charge that cost back pursuant to as a tax as taxes. Next would be transfer of ownership, and in response to some of the questions I think, Mayor, that you had raised with regard to this, because we wanted to make it tighter, that now will provide that no less than 10 days before the sale, a copy of the notice or order will be provided to the prospective buyer, as well as written notice to the building department, which it's now a specific notice that has to be provided there with regard to the transfer. There is also now a penalty provision, which was not in the earlier version, because I think the argument that had been raised by board members is what's the effect if the owner simply doesn't do it? We now have that if the owner has not provided the notice that's required for a first offense, a fine of not less than $500 nor more than $750. I just came up with these numbers. For a second offense, not less than $1,000 and not more than $1,500. For subsequent offenses, fines not less than $2,000, not more than $3,000. But that basically would be a fine to the, not the current owner, but the guy who actually had sold the house, if they do not provide the notice that you have all these particular violations. So.
How many times are they going to transfer ownership? Yeah, I mean, I'm just wondering how many times are they going to transfer ownership, you know, I mean.
But it carries with the person, not specific to a property, right?
Well, yeah, but
Because we do have people who tend to
Well,
own a lot of property.
Oh, but I would give him the big fine right up front. I mean, I would just, we don't want this to happen, and no, I mean, that's what I would say. I mean, it should just never happen, And I think if somebody does that, knowingly, and transfers a piece of property that has issues with the building department, I mean, that's selling, well, it's bad faith for one thing. You're selling a piece of property that's got problems that the buyer doesn't even know about. I just think that's wrong.
At that revision, that's an open question, by the way.
Also, I guess my question, so the person who sold the property gets the fine,
Yes,
how do you go and collect the fine?
get a judgment.
Okay.
You get a judgment.
So, and then once you get a judgment, they'll get like a little, like, we'll search for them, like, what if they leave town?
There are ways to enforce the judgment. You
Okay.
can
So then
attach
I'm-
bank accounts, you can do a variety of different things.
So I would definitely go.
Judgment's good for 20 years.
Okay, so I would definitely say that if we got to search for you.
Yeah, I was just gonna say, there's a level of.
$100 is gonna kinda-
Yeah, there's a
If I
level
gotta
of
look for
effort. No, there's a level of effort that we're gonna have to go to chase this person down and get the judgment, right? I mean, right? I mean,
Yeah.
don't we have to do a lot of work to get the judgment?
There's some, there is work that gets done. I mean, it's a matter of getting the court.
Your work is very
court-
important, and it's worth a lot of money.
Thank you so much.
More than $500.
Yes,
right?
yes,
So
yes,
we want
yeah.
to double all of these fines.
The only thing I would say is this, the way we do this in most of the code is we assess fines based upon first, second, and third offense. So I don't have a problem, I think in terms if you want to raise the number, but, if someone, and there are people who own multiple properties in the village, so if they do this a couple of times, instead of just hitting them once, the
So if
next
this
time
screw
it
over
becomes,
3 people,
yeah.
3 separate times, then we could say no. Like,
Well,
it
no,
just-
then it becomes even, each time it's higher.
Because it gets higher, right?
Yeah,
So I'm just
go ahead.
increase the fee, like.
So
Yeah,
instead of starting
yeah.
at 500, start at 750, go 750 to 1,000, and then go.
This is,
I would go
No,
more than that.
yeah.
No.
Okay.
this is
No,
another-
I would start at
1,000,
1,000.
Yeah.
And by the time the third time round, I'd be up at
10.
5-6 grand, No, I mean, we're talking about a real estate transaction
Yeah.
here, okay? And you gotta make people feel the pain, honestly. If they're gonna act like that,
Social justice, amen.
well, I just think it's
The thing is,
morally
the
wrong
courts
to do
just, the
that.
courts just won't
That's
enforce
just
it.
wrong.
I agree with you, but the courts just won't enforce it if it's too exorbitant. But what were you
Because
gonna say,
it is
Rika?
exorbitant. The issue for me is, tell me again what defines a violation, for example. So I will tell you that one of the biggest issues in our building department is that, A, they make errors, B, that things are missing, right? Like, I just found out about something on my property. If I sold my property today, I didn't know that something was open at all. So, is that a violation? I
No,
mean, if I
because-
didn't notify,
It's not, we're not talking about open permits.
okay,
We're talking about violations on the
actual
property.
violation.
Actual OTRs or appearance tickets that are outstanding. So it's not the matter of knowing that, there's an open permit, that we actually deal with that somewhat later in here. But this is just, you've been directed that you have to fix your railing,
Right,
and you
okay.
don't fix your railing. That's something he has to notify you on.
I mean, listen, you could always, we always have discretion if we're prosecuting these things, but it doesn't mean we can't set the bar high right at the beginning.
Yeah, we
Like,
can start
I
at
can't speak
1,000.
for the courts, but if the courts see that we set it so high, they obviously know that,
There's a reason.
it's a reason why we set that high. Even he or she may not agree with, with that amount, but it's set at that level,
Right.
right? So they would go down a
I would
little.
rather.
And not for
start-
nothing, they just sold a house. So
And not for nothing, they could have sold a house at a loss, and it could be a widow who's selling a house and walking away with 20 grand. Let's be a little bit fair about the houses that we have.
Well, like I
in
said,
this
we can
village
have
and what they
discretion.
were.
We can
I
have.
mean, I agree with you in theory, I'm not disagreeing with you. It's just like, let's.
But
come
if
up
they
with
knew they had the
amount.
violation, I mean, they're.
Right.
yeah,
I mean, I'm not protect. I don't want to protect. I don't want to cost someone. But I don't want to protect someone who did business that way.
Do you have any amounts? So you just made these amounts?
I did.
Because you thought they were.
I just came up with those amounts, correct.
Well, I'm also thinking
It
about
should be
our
doubled.
time,
Yes,
our
I
legal
think we should
counsel's
set it at
time.
1,000.
Conclusion, I
Alright,
didn't think much
so-
of it. So it starts at 500, between 500 to 750, second offense, 1,000 to 1,500, and then going forward, anything third offense or beyond is at least 2,000, not more than 3,000. You were suggesting it should be, 500 is too low to start, is what you're suggesting.
Yeah, I would start at 1,000 to 1,500, and then from there, and then if they do it the third time, then, you know, it's like, come on.
I agree.
You know?
Well, the multiple for sure.
Yeah, I'm just saying, if they're doing it the third time, it should be like 5 or 6 grand. I mean, you should make them pay.
Nah,
Well, okay, if you add up all the numbers, you took out like a 10 grand. So, you know, right? I mean, if they can afford to give up $10,000, we'll take the money, I guess, but, you know.
And for some people, it'll be the cost of doing business and reconciling the violation. I mean, the reason why somebody would do this in a deceptive manner is because the violation is something very expensive they don't want to have to deal with, and they feel that revealing it would undermine their ability to sell the property. So they are being deceptive, and frankly, if the violation only cost $500 for them to be able to reconcile, then they would have just taken care of it. So maybe starting at $1,000 makes sense. And then, yeah.
So is it for the second offense, you want to start at 2?
Yes.
And then for the subsequent offense, you want to start at what?
5.
5? Got it. Ish.
We more than doubled, more than doubled
Yeah,
now.
there you
All
go.
right, all right.
Okay, thank you.
Gotta have justice here, come on.
Okay, the next article are just some changes to, for defining code enforcement personnel. I've added the position of Director of Code Enforcement, so that when that position is added here, that person can issue building permits and certificates of occupancy and things like that.
I'm just wondering, sometimes we periodically go through our codes and realize we have, obsolete titles and new
Right.
titles. Is there a way to say, or their designee, or like, or a designee of the manager, a building department designee? Like, I'm just wondering if there's a way to make it as generic as possible, or you're recommending against that?
Trying
Well,
to protect us in case we change that, right? Like, if it does
Yeah,
change for whatever reason.
Yeah, I don't want to,
well, here,
if we don't
the-
have,
The reason I did that is because under the Westchester County description for the job, the Director of Code Enforcement can write COs and can write permits.
so this is very
So
specific.
this way, by doing that, if we bring that person in, they can write it.
And if we don't have a director of code enforcement, then who can do it?
It's the building inspector or the assistant building inspector.
All right, okay,
So,
good enough.
That's
We'll
what we
have
got
one of
there.
them, right?
Just giving 3 options.
right. The next one, which is Section 8, Mayor, this is one that you had some questions about, which related to, providing notice of, basically, this is the certificate of occupancy prior to sale. And you had asked me, and I apologize, I did not, you had asked me to get in touch with my compatriots in Sleepy Hollow and in Tarrytown. That relates to subsection A here, which deals with, the certificates of occupancy and, finding out, because this is the one that has the fairly high fines, beginning at $5,000 and $1,000 for a day. I can certainly, as I said, I will speak to the folks in Peekskill, which is where this comes from, to see what their experience has been since they did that. But I did not get to them to talk about on that particular section. Subparagraph B is just to add in code enforcement. And the last article here is the one we talked about a bit last time, which was with the presumptions, to put those presumptions in when we bring our cases in court with regard to illegal residential occupancies and overcrowding in dwellings. And I know we talked about that before, and this is pretty much similar to what we had, said. There's no changes from what the prior ordinance that I had presented to you folks.
So, for newer businesses, they will have to fill out an application that will identify the new owners of the building and the new owners of the business and the owner of the building.
For the business registration, yes, for the
Right.
commercial registration, correct.
that means that all existing businesses, the only time that we wouldn't be capturing existing businesses.
Well, you had asked a fair question the last time, which
Yeah.
is, how about as part of our regular permitting process? If we're going out and particularly operating permits, there's no reason that that information cannot be gleaned at that point.
Okay.
Or we're doing a fire inspection or anything like that. The code enforcement officers can certainly get that information then and, and enter it. So
All right,
we
so-
get it there.
Should it be a part of this code, or?
Well,
I mean, to say that we can get information, like, yes, we can get information.
Well, it's actually.
But whether it's actually.
When we actually fill,
Policy,
when the
though.
form is actually filled out for the operating permit, all the information is on there in terms of who the owner is and if there's.
Okay.
Capturing
So it's there already. In other words, it's on the form for it. So we actually have that. We just don't, we just need to get it into a database.
A database?
We have it
Okay. Okay.
We can do that.
Well, it needs to be an administrative policy that
That's-
when
Yeah.
that inspection happens, that those data elements are captured into a database so that we do know who has businesses and what they're doing.
Let me make a suggestion with regard to local law 5. With the exception of the section that I mentioned that I need to speak to the folks up in Peekskill, other than changing the dollar figures that we talked about, that's basically, it looks like we're okay with that. So my suggestion would be that we take that one section out dealing with the certificates of occupancy, because as I also mentioned, and Debbie and I have talked about, that's the one where we would be looking, if we went by our 2016 number of closings, we're looking at least an additional 300-plus inspections that our 3 code enforcement officers would have to do. And that's assuming everybody passes the first time. So, we can, I think, come back to that if we have to. I think it's a valid piece of legislation, and I'll talk to Peekskill, but I think the rest of local law 5 can proceed, at least to a public hearing, and with those, changes to, make the fines higher than we had talked about before. So I leave that, though, up to you folks, but we can certainly do that.
There's a lot of great stuff here that I would be very pleased to be able to move forward. The certificates of occupancy, I know Debbie's concerned about being able to manage the amount of adding it to.
Enforceability of it is the
Right.
hard part.
So I would be interested to know what Peekskill says
Yeah,
is their
so that's why I'm
experience.
gonna-
If it's been something really valuable, then I'd like to understand why and
Sure.
how they could possibly make that happen, because we actually have a bigger staff than them. So we may find out that it's not what we think it is.
Right.
But I would be thrilled to be able to move this forward. My only request is that we don't do the public hearing when I'm out of town, because there's a lot here that I want to be present for.
So we could do a resolution next week, but call for the public hearing at the first meeting in September if you wanted to do that.
Yeah, and we also want to reach out to the business community, the chamber,
Yeah.
and actually give them a copy of the
Maybe the real estate,
draft.
the real estate
It's on the
industry.
Real estate
website.
industry.
Don't you put this stuff on the
Brokers.
website?
Yes.
It'll be on the website,
Yeah,
so we can link
but
it, but,
actual outreach, not just on the website though, like actual
right.
outreach.
Yeah, people being able to find it isn't the same thing as people knowing that it's there to look at. Yeah.
Access is a whole different conversation,
So
but yeah.
we'll take care of that. Okay, thank you. Next,
Excellent. Well, that was a big one.
next is local law 6. That's the day licenses for the cabarets, which we've talked about before. I did,
like this paper.
I think I may have sent a memo around to you folks. I'd misspoken at the last meeting. The least expensive cabaret license fee in the village is $75. That's a half-year fee for a license where you are not serving any alcoholic beverages at all. So that's $75. And we would need to decide, put something into the fee schedule, but this is basically what we've talked about before. It would be notification to the clerk's office no later than 14 days before the event. The chief would do the investigation. There would be an inspection by the building department, and it then would go to the village manager to either deny or to either issue or deny the day license. You could only get 3 in any calendar year, and the license itself is only good for 1 day. So you would, if you wanted to have another event that year, you'd have to apply for another license. But that's.
Okay. So this is ready for
Yeah,
public
this is an
hearing?
easy one. I'm okay with
Yeah.
this.
Do we have to determine the fee
You
at
want
the
to just
time?
determine, well, what fee,
I was
as I
thinking like
said.
$50.
I'm fine with that.
I was thinking 50 because our least
Yeah.
expensive is
Is that
75.
too high or what?
What do you want?
You just huffed. You can't say nothing.
No,
you just
50,
huffed on
50's
camera.
fine. 50's,
Drop a dime like that.
50's
That's
fine.
supposed to mean.
Yeah.
Me and Omar are like 50's fine, let's go. And you're,
fine, it's
you're
okay, it's okay.
disrupting over here.
Listen.
I don't know what.
It's fine. It's fine. 50's fine.
Mayor, is this okay if it goes on the?
Do you prefer 49.99?
No, no.
Okay.
He wants more money.
Do you not know him? He wants more. He doesn't want less.
We were just suggesting that that'll be a public hearing on the 15th as well. So
Okay. If
that'll
you
be a
get
public
3,
hearing for
it'll
this
work.
and for.
Yeah, we'll call for it again next week,
What
right?
do we get for
Right.
You might
Right.
as well get the permit.
Yeah, we're doing the tether law.
tether laws?
Okay, next is, this is just, next is 7 of 2018. This is the gas-powered leaf blowers. I know that the town last night continued their public hearing. I don't.
Yeah, I wanted to
open.
go.
The only change in this is that there was a request by the folks from Ossining Lawnmower to include a provision with regard to maintenance and testing.
Right.
So I've added a provision that the operation of gas-powered leaf blowers for maintenance and testing shall not exceed more than 30 minutes in any 7-day period. Maintenance and testing shall occur during daytime hours, which is what we already have for generators. There was a question asked about emergency situations. We actually have that in the code now, that if there is an emergency situation as declared by the village manager in terms of weather, that would allow for the use of gas-powered leaf blowers, regular leaf blowers, fans, whatever, those kind of things. So that's already in the code.
Could somebody tell me, Yom Kippur? Why does my calendar say
Wednesday,
September 19th
It's-
is?
Because the meeting is on that Monday.
Ah,
It's gonna be held here because the is not available.
Yeah, I won't be here.
Parking,
Parking.
you won't be here on the 17th? I know you won't be here on the 19th. Okay, that'll work. Okay. All right, so we don't want to do it that week. And we don't want to do it Labor Day week. So if we're pushing it to the fall to give plenty of time for notification, then we're talking about October 3rd.
that would be local law 5 we talked about?
No, just Labor Day already?
Not yet.
For the summer.
Oh, Mayor, which one are we talking about?
Local law number
Local law
7.
7.
So do you want to do, okay.
Because we
So-
were talking about maybe we would call for the public hearing now.
We said we could give them.
But give the date,
Yeah.
a month and a half from now or whatever, so that gives people a big lead time to be able to do the promotion, Ossining Lawnmower will let
We
all
can
of
do
their
the
clients
resolution on
know.
August 1st, but when would you like to call for the public hearing?
That's what I was just looking at. I think September's kind of between Labor Day week and Yom Kippur week being a weird day and being here. I think we would discourage participation, so I would push it to October 3rd.
And I think they indicated they'd like to put it further out so that way they could pass out whatever, stuff.
Everybody's,
That's for next year anyway.
I just wanted to make sure that we were still under the understanding that this would also apply to the Village of Ossining municipality itself.
Yeah, the only
Why does it
circumstances
We didn't make
where it
our- we-
doesn't
I don't
is
think we
if
actually put it
property's
in.
No, we didn't
greater than
actually put it
1/2
in.
acre.
Okay. Oh, no, because I know that the town and theirs and,
Town
and,
exempts
and
themselves.
Yes,
We
but-
didn't.
Right, I
we
just
didn't
wanted to put it on the
exempt
Talked
record
about
again.
it.
But,
We
but
went with
technically, the
over-
village is more than.
And we could change
Legally, we actually don't have to, but we didn't exempt ourselves.
Yeah, no, because like we use this stuff a lot. I mean, we're one of the biggest offenders of it, so that's why I'm bringing it up.
So we went with over half an acre.
And I know.
So, and we should probably, I'm looking at Debbie, because it's your staff. Rather than asking, if those are people who are going to be particularly affected by it, and affected by it in a different way, because they do like cleanup of the village fair, they might use it, which is not usually what we're thinking of. So we might want to have a conversation with sanitation and highway, just functionally. I don't want them coming up on October 3rd and standing there for 4 minutes and talking to us about it or whatever. I want to, they're our staff, and I don't want to, I'm not trying to exempt them, because I'm not trying to say that but I want to understand, and they work
October
for us.
3rd works out well because the provision is that the statute does not the restriction doesn't become effective until December 16th of 2018. So there's another
Well,
lead.
I'm just bringing it up too because just as as we enter our budget season, maybe that because we believe in this and it's the right thing to do, maybe it's time that we with our village manager along with the department head to look at how we could change the materials or tools that we use that are better
Is there
for the
something to
environment
invest
and
in?
health. If there is, what other alternatives that we're asking our residents to buy that we could buy.
Vinny DeSisto, what we should be buying.
Hey.
Okay, so that's local law 7. And then, one you have not seen before, but it's sent around, local law 8. That's the one on parades. So
We talk about it a
this
lot.
will remove your responsibility to issue those permits. It will go to the village manager. It's been changed that The application should be to the chief of police not less than 7 days before the event. Basically, the chief then reports it to the village manager, and the village manager will then issue the permit. So that's the change there. I did take out language previously. The code currently says that the chief of police shall investigate, and where the information has been provided, provided the proposed parade, procession, or gathering is otherwise lawful. Those are really waffle words, and when you're dealing with parades and public speech, saying or otherwise lawful, all I want the chief to basically say is there a traffic issue? Is there a manpower issue? And that's it, because that's really where he's got. So why they're marching is not the issue. So I just took that out, but otherwise, it basically gives the authority to the village manager to issue the permit. And that, is, I think, in line with what we talked about, and it does require, though, to the extent practicable, not that at least not less than 7 days before the event, they have to make the application to the chief.
Do we actually have an application, like, available?
It's really just, what happens is people just write to him and say, I'm planning to hold a
I don't
rally
like that.
here.
So,
No.
can we actually
You could
create
try.
an application out of the village manager's office, and then she can send that application over to the police chief?
Yeah,
So
the
he can do
website
that.
and the police.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, okay.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it's like 4 questions or something. It's not complicated. It just
But-
gets the
but-
ball rolling.
An online
Date
form.
on it.
But,
It's all numbered.
Not that
here.
one.
and it'd
there
be the
yet.
responsibility,
It's right there. That all should be filled in.
I think that because it needs to be sent around, it's better to be, I'm sorry. Because it needs to be sent around, it doesn't make sense to have it come in that way.
We're not there yet. Okay, all right.
Yeah. It's just
So-
not a function of the website.
Okay.
I'm just thinking of how applications are filed. Can there be like one point person? Like, can you be the point person, but you send it to the chief, and then instead of like, or does it work like?
If I print it out, I should
It's
just go to
actually
you,
better
right?
if it just goes to the chief first, because he's used to getting them.
Uh-huh.
And that way he can do what he needs, because his input is really most critical. And if you send it to me and then I send it to him and then he has to send
That's
it
the
back,
point,
that's
yeah.
just a delay in
Yeah,
in
that's
the
just another,
processing.
that's a lot, that's more of a.
So, but now we have to see if we have an
Maybe we could ask the
application.
chief to have a form,
Well, we'll create the form and we'll work with him to make
Okay.
sure that all the information's on there that he's gonna want and then we'll put it online.
So, I understand for parades, processions, the need for time, but let's say something happens politically in the national climate, and I want to organize an event for tomorrow because that's the national day that tomorrow is. At that point, I guess we'll handle it on a case-by-case basis.
That's why it says as soon, to the extent
Okay.
practical.
Okay. I just wanted to make sure.
But I do think that the issue, I remember this like the first month I was a trustee. So we have people that do parades every year, right? We have religious organizations that do parades it's like the same event. And we have a couple that do lots and lots of parades, right? Costing taxpayers, by the way, especially with that Route 9 crossover, real dollars. So, the question starts being like to inform them. They know in advance they're doing it. It's not a political emergency, or it could be theoretically, but there's 80% of these parades are done all the time. So if we could have a way so that the public is notified in time, so that you have time to notify people. Part of it is also the ability to notify the public that the roads are being shut down or changed, in a more pragmatic way. It would be appreciated, I think, by the public who does not participate in the parade and would like to drive sort of around it.
Well, the police department uses Nixle pretty liberally when it comes to the.
Yeah, but if they don't have enough time, then it doesn't really work as
Well,
well.
I can see getting more advanced information out.
Yeah, and I mean, some of these parades are being planned now, because they need volunteers, they need, they plan months. So if we can encourage and send out to the regulars, the ones we know that for years have been doing for certain holidays, and let them know, get the paperwork in, et cetera, I think that would be helpful, which is why I think a form is a much better way than waiting for a letter to arrive. Because you could send the form out and say, hey, we know that for the past 10 years on whatever day you normally do, can you please fill it out now? We line it up. I just think it's more efficient.
No, I think you're right,
Which is why
especially
the
for
form would be very
organizations.
helpful.
Yeah, organizations. I just wanted to make sure that if you want to protest, rally,
Right.
regardless what this board says, please do so. Just make sure you follow the law.
Yeah, that
Right,
actually,
well, that
to
doesn't
that
change.
point, like, is there a way to?
Yeah, that's what I mean. That's
Yeah.
against the law. That's against the law.
If you're doing a public gathering,
What was the question?
yeah, is there a way to, so to the extent practicable, not less than 7 days. So in theory, a public gathering shouldn't take 7 days to approve, though. Like if something,
Well, now it's not going to us. Now it's just going to Kevin and Debbie, which is great.
okay,
But before, I had to wait for a meeting and
Gotcha.
Right.
quorum and
okay. So this should be faster.
Right. But also asking for things in advance would be nice. There's no reason not to. Works both ways.
parades.
And I can do a resolution for this as well.
Yeah.
If you have a problem with this on for the,
No, this is an operational thing. I would love
Yeah.
to see it move forward. If anybody has any concerns and you feel the need to keep it open so we can hear another time, then I'm trusting.
so just so I got it, the local law 5 we talked about, we're going to call for the public hearing, but public hearing will be the first Wednesday in September. I think we want to do that.
Oh,
Because we didn't set a date. I know we said it's going to be September, but is there a?
yeah, so that's fine. We can do that. We may just keep it open.
Okay.
Because the building code revisions is really big and
Extensive.
hefty, and so we might
We
want
did,
to
well,
allow.
we did when we did the other one.
Yeah, and then we probably want to allow people to react to it the first week, learn about it, show up again the next time. So we'll do it in September, but then,
Now, and just, because I didn't say it before, with regard to local law 4, which is the feral cats, I will probably have the draft, by our last session in August, so we can at least have some discussion then, and then go forward and notice that at another time.
I'm sorry, go ahead.
No, I'm just saying we got a lot here.
Could you check, Jamie, if we're going to have our legislative session September 17th, which is a Monday, which is already a weird day anyway, if we're having public hearings, I'd rather be able to do it at like the community center. I mean, the library would be great, but really the community center would be fine. I just want to make sure that there's, people are going to show up and comment on things. That might be a better
You're
forum.
looking if we continue that public hearing from like September 4th? that-
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah,
And then
I
the
think we
August
will.
29th one, do you want also at the community center or at the library?
Which one?
The library would be best, just because it's a better space if it's
Okay.
available. I don't know if
Then
we ever.
but then we have to start, oh, sorry. Well,
Yes.
no, I thought that.
Yes,
you were
August
bringing
29th is a work
because
session as
affordable
well.
housing is going to be on that discussion.
No, it's August 20, yes,
Well, that
but the reason we were thinking of doing it is
Vacancy
because it's
study.
the vacancy study report is
Right.
coming to us. I mean, we're just sitting and listening to the report, but it's something that a lot of people are going to be interested in.
Okay, so I'll check with the library
August
first.
29th?
and then
Check with the
I'll-
library, yeah.
I'll default them.
I will say, the library would be much better because there we're gonna be looking at a screen a lot, and I think we saw that the screen at the
Yeah.
community center leaves something to be desired, and it wouldn't be that great of a forum. In that case, if mostly what we're doing is let's see if the library's available for August 29th.
And then we would start that at 7?
Oh,
If it's at the library, yeah.
Okay.
So the September 17th, the community center is fine for that.
Okay.
I just want space for people. It's not a presentation.
Okay.
I'm sorry. Continue, Stuart. You were going through. What are next
No, I
steps?
think we've gone through them all.
Okay. But next week we're calling for a public hearing for.
We're going to call, well, next week we'll be calling for public hearings actually on local laws 5, 6, 7, 8, and 9, but the dates of the public hearing will be different depending on which of the local laws they are. Local Law 3, which is affordable housing, I will be revising based upon tonight's discussions. Local Law 4, which is feral cats, will be revised. It sounds like a woman's name, I'm sorry. No, it's been a
What
long
woman do
night.
you know?
It'll be, yeah, Cheryl cats, feral cats, I don't know.
I get it.
That's what I keep thinking of.
Carol will not be happy.
Living with these laws for months and
Actually a
months.
person.
So feral cats, you're still
Still working on it.
working on?
So you're going to be able to make all these revisions and deadlines in,
Well-
because that's, now that you've asked what dates we want, you have to figure
Well,
out whether you
local
can
law,
do
well,
it.
in terms of the local laws, only 5 actually has a revision to it, which are the fine numbers, and taking out that one section. The others are as they are. Local Law 3 is the affordable housing. That's the one that I would have the revision for you by the 29th, based upon our discussion tonight. That's the
Got
affordable
it.
housing. So I think we're fine with that. And as I said, the feral cat legislation, that also can be by the end of August, because I already have the law that I will be utilizing as the basis for it.
Okay.
And there'll also be a resolution next week based upon the discussion with Jim Stout tonight, which will simply refer the special permit application to the planning board for its recommendation.
We have a maintenance agreement for village
So this is
generators.
really easy and quick. So we have several generators throughout the village, and we do hire a company to come and do annual maintenance on it, run testing. There are activities and testing and things that the staff does on a monthly basis, but this is just having a company come in and actually really service them, if you will.
This is the time of year to do
It's-
it.
And so this is a 5-year contract. It's something that we've been doing for a very long time, and,
How much?
oh, I don't know.
Is it in our regular operating budget?
It is. I'm sorry. I
Okay.
didn't
Well, no,
bring it with me,
we could
so-
see it when it's on the agenda.
Oh,
I was
yeah,
just
or I can email
curious.
you tomorrow. I can find out what.
But
what
if
the
it's in the
cost-
budget, then all right.
It is.
Cool.
It's something we do regularly, so.
And it's very important. Okay. What, did you have?
No,
another-
I'm waiting for you to do motion to adjourn.
He's jumping out of his seat.
Wow. Headed for the exit.
All of our bedtime.
Right, yeah. There was something else I know I want to talk about, but we will talk about it next week. Motion to, there's no exec?
Oh, yeah, actually, maybe just a quickie.
Personnel?
Yes, personnel.
Okay. Motion to adjourn to executive session for matters of personnel related to specific persons.
So moved.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Thank you very much. We look forward to seeing you next week at the Birdsall Fagan Police Court facility for our next legislative session. This meeting is adjourned to exec. Okay.